Good evening and welcome to the February 25th Planning Commission meeting. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. It's a little chilly out there. Hopefully the warm weather comes soon, but not for the next few days. Jackie, if you could take the roll, please.
Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here. So I just want to say something before we start tonight. There's two commissioners on here. It's their last meeting, Commissioner Schroeder and Commissioner Scheer. And we'll have cookies at the end if anyone wants to stay around to celebrate their last meeting. And it's been 9 years apiece, roughly. So, wow, thank you for your service and definitely will be missed. Wait till after the meeting before we say that? Okay. Well, up until now, you've been okay. So the first thing on the agenda tonight is approval of the meeting agenda, and there is a couple minor changes to it. First of all, the Wooddale Valley View small area plan that will actually be moved to March 25th. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then under reports and recommendations, Vision Edina will be pushed out as well.
Yeah, we'll come back with that one on March 11th.
March 11th. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carried. Up next is approval of the consent agenda. The only item on there this evening is the meeting minutes, which I believe Jackie emailed out earlier this week. Are there any changes or updates to those? Nancy, was your name correct on them for the last time? Okay, perfect. Hearing none, I'd take a motion to approve. Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Up next is community comment. This is where anyone from the community can come up for up to 3 minutes and mention anything. I would ask, though, that anything that you're bringing up is not on the agenda or a public hearing later when we can hear about it that time. So if you give your name and address, please.
Sure, my name is Jim Groats. I live at 5513 Park Place. At the last meeting of the Planning Commission, we showed a drawing of the south side of 5509 Park Place, which is on our side yard. 5 licensed architects have looked at the plans and all have identified the highest gable on the house. Staff identified a different area on the house as the gable, which resulted in the house being built too close to ours, and the house was not built step-backed as required. Chairman Platter asked staff to come back with information on how this house meets code and how the code was interpreted. I'm wondering if you heard anything, because staff is disagreeing now with 5 different licensed architects. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing no one rushing forward, I'd take a motion to close. Or did you have something on the?
Are you going to be discussing the Lakewoods Frank Berman property?
Yeah, that's coming up under public hearings. So yeah, at that time, you feel free to step forward. Anyone else? I take a motion to close the community comment.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Up next are the public hearings. First up is a variance on 4141 West 44th Street. These are public hearings, so as we get into these, the staff will give a presentation, and at that time, after that, we'll open it up for the public to testify, and then anyone who wants to come forth on these projects can at that time. I don't think your mic's on.
Can you hear
Welcome
me
back,
now?
Chris.
Okay. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, the subject property is located at 4141 West 44th Street. It is for, the request is for a front and rear yard setback variance. The subject property is located on the south side of 44th Street. It consists of a rambler with an attached two-car garage. As you can see on the west side, there is an in-ground swimming pool, which has since been removed by the current property owner. This is a current survey of the property, indicating the existing conditions as well as the proposed additions to the home, and a more detailed version of that showing highlighted areas of the addition. The boxed-in area of red is the buildable area of the lot. This is a very unique shaped lot. It's part of the old streetcar right-of-way that was platted into lots, so the lots are very shallow and quite wide. The minimum lot depth for a residential lot now is 120 feet, and these lots are just a little over 65 feet in depth. So they're just a little over half the depth that we would currently require for a minimum lot depth. These are the existing floor plans of the house, the basement as well as the main floor. You'll notice that in the back there's a small bump out towards the rear of the house. And what the property owner would like to do is to add on to the side of the house, to the garage, which would be to the east, match the bump out in the back with some cantilevered additions to afford more space in the kitchen and bedroom areas, and then expand also out to the west, and then add a very small front porch. Here are the new side elevations of the project, the new front and rear yard elevation, or rear elevation showing the porch addition is highlighted, and the cantilevered areas in the back. This illustrates the additions to the home in context with the homes on either side. The spacing between the subject home and the homes to the east and west is quite generous because of the width of the lot. They're very unique shaped lots. Within your report, there was a compliance table indicating that the property owner is requesting two variances. One from rear yard setback, which would match the existing non-conforming setback of that small bump out to the back. And the other one is a small, a little over 1 foot variance for the porch addition, which actually you're allowed to have an 80 square foot porch overlap into the front yard setback area as long as it's no closer than 20 feet. However, because of the shallowness of the lot, the existing house is only a little over 18 feet away from the front lot line. So there are two variances that are being requested. However, the compliance table on page 3 does indicate that the current survey illustrates that the project is over on the allowed lot coverage limit of 2,250 square feet. The applicant submitted an email diagram, which was also included in your report, revising the plans to show that they could meet the coverage requirements. Staff did indicate to the property owner that a lot coverage variance would not be supported by staff and would not likely be approved by the Planning Commission. There is no coverage variance that is being requested, so any variance approval would be conditioned on a revised plans and survey verifying that they do have coverage compliance. The owner just didn't want to go to the expense of having the plans and survey redone if additional changes would be required based on the variance review by Planning Commission. It's just very slight modifications to the plan. They're reducing just a few things to comply with the 2,250 square foot maximum. The primary issue is the proposed development reasonable for the site. Staff does believe that the proposal is reasonable. The proposed use is permitted in the R1 single dwelling unit district and will comply with the exception of the setbacks from front and rear. The house is currently extremely non-conforming. The allowable depth of a house on that particular property is only 21 feet. I don't think any of the homes that were built on the streetcar platted lots conform to the setback requirements currently, and this house also doesn't. The home is appropriate in size and scale for the lots, and the improvements will enhance the property. The improvements will provide a reasonable use of a rather shallow lot that is heavily impacted given the current front and rear yard setbacks. And the additions simply match the existing nonconforming setbacks that have been in existence since 1956, and introduces a very slight front yard setback variance for an open front porch. Staff does recommend approval for the variance. The proposal meets the required standards for variance because the practical difficulty is caused by the shallow lot depth and existing nonconforming conditions of the property. The encroachment into the setbacks continues an existing nonconforming setback that was established when the home was originally built, and the request is reasonable given the location of all of the existing features on the property. Approval of the variance is subject to the following conditions: that the home must be constructed as per the proposed plans, with the revised survey to be submitted at permit application to conform to the compliance with the lot coverage requirements, and then also compliance with the conditions and comments listed in the environmental engineer's memo, which included that there be a provision to allow the city inspection of a sump pump discharge line. This property hadn't been inspected by the engineering department previously. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Lee.
Chris, did this project require a demolition permit?
No.
And how is that determined, whether a demolition permit is required? What's that based on?
Well, if it's a tear-down rebuild situation, if there's more than 50% of the exterior wall area removed, then it needs a construction management plan, and it's considered new construction.
So how does staff determine whether 50% or more of the walls are being removed? Is there a demolition work removal plan that the applicant submits?
They have to show it on their plans as how much they're going
Would
to
it
do.
have been in this set that we received?
Not necessarily. They would show that at time of building permit application.
Okay, so there is a determination at some point that-
Yes,
by
yes.
staff. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thanks, Chris. Would the applicant like to step forward, say anything? Any discussions?
I don't have anything to add. Chris had that several times, and trying to make it look better.
Okay.
The house and I are the same age, and one of us has had maintenance work, the other one hasn't. So I'm trying to get it upgraded a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay, this is a public hearing, so if anyone wants to come forth and have any comments, approach the podium at this point. Podiums. Don't all rush. All right, seeing none, I take a motion to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Public hearing is closed. Back up to the commission. Does anyone have any comments, questions? Commissioner Lee.
This project reminds me of a lot of projects we've been getting and continue to get, and that is that it's adding a second story onto a one-story structure. And so I think that I'm really paying attention now very closely to what constitutes demolition. Although this is phrased as an addition of minuscule amounts just to line up with the existing bump outs on the foundation, it occurs to me that actually if something was going to be constructed, it would more likely be that you would tear out those walls rather than simply add on the additional. So in looking at this, it was my sense that this one would or should require a demolition permit. And the reason for going in that direction, obviously, is there's a lot more oversight that would have to be considered by the applicant as well as the residents, the neighbors. So I think we had a project come before us that we found out after the fact. It was very similar to this. It was supposed to be a second story above a first story, and it ended up that the entire first story was removed down to the foundation. So although it was caught after the fact, I am just looking a little more closely at this, and maybe in some case we need to review it. Chris, you said that there would be other plans potentially submitted by the applicant, maybe not as part of our packet, where you make that determination. One of the things I realize is that we require plans, but some do a better job than others as far as denoting what's going to be actually removed with a dashed line on the actual walls. Sometimes they'll show, a window being taken out, but then you realize when a window is going back in and it's 3 times bigger, that there's actually part of the wall that needs to be removed in order to make that opening bigger to receive the new window. Sometimes you find out that the opening is so big that it would literally be easier to knock down the entire wall with the old window and rebuild the new opening. So that's where I'm questioning how much demolition is actually going to be taking place on this. Is there some other plans that the city would use to evaluate the amount of removal?
We would ask that at the time of building permit application, and it has been problematic because there have been situations where a project has started and they've started removing walls, and for whatever reason, if it's if there's mold or if there's other issues involved with it, and they should have had a demolition permit. They should have shown that in the plans, but. I'd say typically we are given plans and we ask the question, is this a tear down rebuild? How much are you removing? Is there more than 50% that's getting torn down? But you're absolutely right. There are situations where there have been, or it would appear to be that there would be more than just what you would think would be removed.
So I guess I'll just go back to this plan here. It's highlighted in green, I guess on the site plan, as to what are called additions. But when you look at them, it's the plan-wise, it's actually extending the space within it. So that means that wall where the addition is being built against has to be removed. And when I start seeing this much green going around the entire perimeter of the structure, I do feel that it's approaching, if not already exceeded, the 50% mark.
Well, and they would need a demo permit then. And we've had to get after the fact demo permits, and then they're double feed, and it's more problematic to come in afterwards and try to get to be required to get a demo permit because there's more involved with it, and they are double feed then. But if it is required, then they would need to have a demo permit along with it.
Okay, so is that something, if we're asked to approve the variance, would that be something that we could make a condition of approval?
That they receive a demo permit?
That they have to apply for a demolition permit?
If it's over 50%, yes, and we would do that anyway. But if you're concerned about that, certainly we can. They would have to get that.
Once it's a demolition permit, then we get into the CPM, CMP.
Construction management plan. Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Then it's more complicated, and certainly they want to do it up front because it's more difficult to try to get all of that taken care of after the fact.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else? If you maybe want to come forward to maybe step one of the side speakers so you're
I
on.
just wanted to address one issue that was brought up by Commissioner Lee. It is not a second-story addition. There is no second story going in this house. Changing the roof angle because there's a 4.5-inch sag in the front of the roof, and the garage space is already 3 inches almost caving in. It's fallen down. But I'm just going to improve it. I'm not going to put up a big house. I was very specific when I met with Chris that I wanted to keep it in the nature to fit in with all my neighbors. I went and talked with 80% of the people that live around me, and most of them were very supportive. I didn't have anybody that had any complaints. They were looking forward to actually getting this eyesore kind of fixed up to make it look like a nice house again. But there is no second-story addition going on. This is not a jumbo remodel. It isn't building a McMansion. It's just kind of fixing what I have. So.
You are, however, increasing significantly the roof volume, so it won't be a rambler anymore. It will be a one-story house with a significant volume.
Yes, the roof
in
pitch
height.
is changing, correct.
Do you know, let me see here. How much additional height are you adding from the existing?
Don't quote me on it. I think it's 6 feet, 8 feet. It's not a lot. It's going from 410 to 1010.
8 feet?
So, that it would be at the most.
Yeah, my comment about second story, that was in reference to the other projects that we've been seeing, but again, it's looking at how much is actually going to remain and what is being done. So that's, to me, what is your sense? Are you? We could look at some of the plans. I just don't even see how you can do some of this work without taking down the entire wall. I mean, are you planning on literally taking out the window and then cutting the studs to make the window opening wider?
Well, in the back where I'm adding on, or I'd like to add on those areas that, Chris had talked about filling in the bump out piece. It's this thing is, my kitchen's about the size of this island thing here, literally. It's an old house, and as Chris said, it's on a very, very unusual lot. You step out the back door and I can shake hands with all my neighbors. It's that kind of deal. But I won't be encroaching on any of their space. The bump out area is already there. I've taken out the pool, which I thought was truly an eyesore. Didn't allow for a lot of drainage. That's going to be improved. The rest of the concrete will be taken out. More green space will be added back in. I'm going to make this a better place, hands down. And it's not going to be, it will fit in with the neighborhood. That was really important for me. So on those two areas on the back, yes, a new wall will go in to fill in that area so that I can sit down at my kitchen table without, bumping the refrigerator.
Does it make sense to put that as a condition on there at this point?
It might. I think partly when we are asked to look at a variance, we have been asked to use or look at what is existing and sort of base our the new proposed work based on that. But a part of me also says it is already not in compliance. That is the variance itself. So how much we need to continue to perpetuate that just because of the existing condition, it has to be demonstrated to me that it's actually a hardship because of the way it is. In this particular case, it was more, I think, a concern for that. It's my sense that there's going to be significant demolition, and if your neighbors are fine with that, that's really great. But we've had situations where it wasn't obvious that it was that amount of demolition. So I'd rather err on the side of getting a construction management plan in place. Also, I didn't see the signature, although I have to commend you for getting the signatures. I thought that was a very nice way of handling it, and appreciate it very much. But I think it was the neighbor to your right.
Connie lives in California in the winter. So I emailed her, and she and I are very good friends. She said it'll be great. I think that's who you're referring to.
Whatever house. Yeah. But I also realize that it's sometimes difficult for residents to make an appearance for whatever reasons, and there's also the fact that they need to maintain their relations among other neighbors. There might be a better process for us to have in place, but I guess I would err on the side of requiring that because it is something that in this particular case, I still think that it would be with that amount of demolition. I mean, the entire roof is going to come off. The windows are significantly changing along the back. You're building out a bump, but that means the wall that's there now has to be ripped out. So anywhere you've added the bump, the existing wall is going to be ripped out. So that's just my sense. I think if there's a way to put a condition on that,
you can
I guess
propose one.
we would do that, yeah.
Anyone else? Commissioner Carr.
I would move approval of the variance, subject to the staff conditions that are outlined, with the addition of the another condition, and that is the staff review the plans to determine if a demolition permit is required by ordinance. And I don't think we can say too much more on that issue, but at least we would put in the approval that particular condition.
there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's good. I'll take a look at it.
Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, this is a variance request for 4214 Scott Terrace. It's to increase the first floor elevation higher than 1 foot. If you went out to the site, the house is gone. And they did receive a demo permit. They applied for a demo permit before they had a building permit, and you can do that. You can remove a house. You don't have to have a building permit in place. But their timing was they demo the house and then they build. They did submit for a building permit application. It met all of the zoning ordinance requirements. Under engineering review, it was determined that there's flood zone in the backyard. And the existing foundation, which they wanted to keep and build on, the lowest floor elevation is actually higher than the flood elevation, but lower than the 2 feet that we require per ordinance to be above. So they have to lift their first floor up in order to be within that 2-foot requirement. Therefore, they are going to be increasing their first floor elevation. The previous plan would increase it 1 foot maximum. Now they're requesting a variance to allow it to be 1 foot 4 inches. So the variance is actually for a 4-inch above the 1 foot that's allowed by the ordinance in order for them to have 8-foot ceilings, because they need to now bring up the basement to be within the 2-foot requirement. The subject property is located on the west side of Scott Terrace.
Chris, if I could stop you for just a second. So there's things built out there today. So there's it looks like they've built walls in the basement level. So how is that the new house they're building today? Or is that the demo one?
Well, they shouldn't be. They've demoed the existing construction, and there was a foundation that was left. I don't know if there's anything else remaining there from the old construction, but they don't currently have a building permit to construct the new house.
I guess I can ask the applicant, but either they didn't demo it all the way or they're building already, and I'm not sure which. So.
Well, and that would be an appropriate question for them,
okay.
I would think. It was a Rambler it's located on the west side of Scott Terrace, consisting of a 1-story home with an attached 2-car garage. It's a rather large lot. There's a low area towards the back of the lot, which currently has flood zone area in it. This is what the home looked like before it was demolished. A little closer view. This is a survey of the existing conditions when the house was there previously, and also the proposed house, and showing an addition off the back that would be an increase in the footprint. The buildable area is the area that's indicated in red. This is the stormwater management, erosion control, and drainage plan that has been reviewed by the engineering department, and it was determined that the lowest floor was below the flood elevation. This is the basement plan that they're proposing with an addition off the back, main floor plan, and then they would add a second story that would be centered. This is the front elevation that's being proposed. The 2 side elevations. the rear. And then showing it in context, you saw a photograph earlier of the two homes on either side with the new home in between. The eligibility requirements for variance for the 1-foot maximum increase in first floor height. This used to be a conditional use permit process. It is now a variance process. However, the conditions for variance are the same as the conditional use permit. And the requirements are that in order for the variance to be considered, they would need to elevate the lowest floor to be an elevation 2 feet above the 100-year flood elevation, or the dwelling would have to be protected from groundwater intrusion, and to alleviate the first floor elevation to the extent necessary to meet state building code. They're trying to do this because the engineering department has required them. It's gotten to the point where this is the time to correct a problem that we've had. It's an existing foundation, but we don't want to keep it as low as it's at right now. This is the time to correct that problem. The grading and drainage of the property, the environmental engineer has reviewed the application and submitted comments in a memo in the attached staff report. The memorandum states that the engineering has no problems with the plans as submitted and is in support of raising the low floor elevation. In fact, that's really why we're here, to remove it from risk of flooding. The proposed plans show a very minimal amount of grading on the lot, and it will closely mimic the existing conditions or the previous conditions that were there. The applicant is only proposing to increase the impervious space by 12.5 square feet. They're removing a shed in the backyard, so it should be very minimal. According to the engineer's memo, the neighboring private property will not be affected by the proposed grading and drainage plans for the redevelopment of the project. So does the proposed new home meet the criteria for approval of a variance with the first floor elevation of 4 inches higher than the existing home? Staff does believe the proposal meets the criteria for a variance to allow the first floor elevation 1.33 feet higher than the existing home, or 4 inches higher than what we would allow. The proposed home design elevates the lowest floor level of the dwelling in an elevation of 2 feet above the 100-year flood elevation, which is a goal that the city is trying to achieve with some of the redevelopment projects that are close to or within the floodplain. The proposed home design elevates the first floor to the extent necessary to meet the state building code with regard to minimum ceiling heights and minimum floor truss sizes. It allows for an 8-foot ceiling in the basement. The proposed home design project fits the character of the neighborhood in height and scale and mass. They've actually, the original plan when they came in had a much higher roof line. They did bring that down considerably, so it's not as tall as it had been originally. The request meets the criteria for approval of variance given the following findings. The proposal meets the conditions for a variance and all other applicable zoning ordinance requirements, and it fits within the character of the neighborhood. Staff does recommend approval of the variance as requested, subject to the findings listed within the staff report, and the site must be developed and maintained in conformance with the plans. Survey date stamped February 10th, 2015, and building plans and elevations date stamped February 10th, 2015, and also compliance with the conditions and comments listed in the environmental engineer's memo dated February 18th, 2015. And with that, I will stop and answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Commissioner Scheer.
Chris, just to clarify, so since we're dealing with a floodplain issue, which is driving this, I did notice too that the foundation is still there. I'm assuming that the floor of the foundation has to be raised?
Yes, that's what they have to do.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lee.
Chris, what do we currently require for basement floor to ceiling height, or how is it defined?
I believe in the building code you have to have at least 7.5 feet, but I would say typically most people want a minimum of 8. But most building plans that I review, they want 8.5, 9, 10-foot ceilings in the basement.
Sure.
That's what I see.
What I'm trying to determine is whether this really requires a variance. Okay, so Could they, let me ask this question, could they, without a variance, meet the requirement of the comprehensive water resources management requirement for the lowest floor to be a minimum of 2 feet above the flood elevation and still also meet our basement height requirements?
Yes. We're
And that's-
talking about 4 inches.
Pardon?
We're talking 4 inches.
Yeah, I think the amount is irrelevant. It's really doesn't require a variance. If they in fact could have met it without a variance, I think to me that's important. Then I tend to look at, okay, so now if we are being asked to actually spend the time to look at this, then I'm going to review all the plans and everything. I did see that the height on the basement level was significantly more than 8 feet. So, but I could direct that to the applicant.
Well, and I think those are appropriate questions for the applicant
Yep.
because they are choosing to go forward with the variance on it.
That's correct.
This is a situation where they were in the process, they were in the stream of having a demo permit, getting their building permit, getting their plans all in order, and they've been told now, you know, this is the time for the city to address this problem. So now you have to change it. I believe there are some issues with the soils there and that there's pilings, and that's why, you know, one of the reasons why they want to keep the foundation. But again, I think these are some questions that are appropriate for the applicant.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Hobbs.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned that it's going to more or less mimic the existing conditions in terms of stormwater and grading, and there weren't any. Do we know if there are any problems with the existing conditions in terms of stormwater?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because I can't answer that necessarily, but we do have our environmental engineer here who could possibly answer some of those questions. But I don't think currently there are, I guess I'm not quite sure if there's problems other than, you know, if they're existing, not relating to this change in the project. So.
Yeah, I'm just, when looking at the plans, just looking to the north in particular, I'm just wondering, it's pretty tight there, if there's any issues in terms of drainage.
Well, if any additional questions for Chris, we could have Ross come up if we want. Want to do that? Ross, would you be available? Thank you.
You, Chair.
So yeah, Ross, I'm just wondering if there's any issues, especially on the north side, and do you know of any potential drainage issues to the north, the neighbor to the north?
This site is subject to FEMA floodplain elevation. The Weber Pond area in Morningside backs up into low areas nearby. This low area is to the southwest of Weber Pond. So it does fill with floodwater in extreme events. So I would characterize that as a problem, but not one that's within the scope of an individual lot and its grading and drainage. The grading and drainage on this plan meets our requirements. There are associated issues with the storm line and easement that run through this property that we're also dealing with, but none that pertain to the permit application.
So nothing that's in this application is exacerbating the problem?
That's correct.
Is there anything that could be done with this permit, with this application, that would help to alleviate any of the problem? Or
the problem is pretty massive in scope. Recently, we looked at alternatives for storing multiple acre feet on a nearby residential redevelopment or a infill development. And even with multiple acre feet, we would only make a marginal and almost unmeasurable difference in the total flood protection. So anything that could happen on this lot by lot scale just doesn't measure.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bitter. Would the applicant like to step forward and give us some information here? If you'd step to the, if you have anything to show, or you can in the center, otherwise the side podiums would work. Just give us your name and address on that.
Sure. So currently, like in the old basement, we have 89 inches only.
Can you give us your name and address, please?
My name is Zion. I am the agent, and this would be Dan. He is the homeowner.
Okay.
So I am the builder who's going to be building the house. So we did take the house down, but we did not finish all the way complete because we found out that we have a problem, so we have to fix it. So we kind of stopped to see where is it going to take it next. The existing basement, or the old basement, had 89 inches in the basement, was not more than 8 feet. 89 inches, that's a little bit below 8 feet. The only problem that I get into with building a 7.5 feet ceiling is when I'm putting down the stairs, I'm not going to have enough headroom to build. So I need just a little bit more to make it to meet the code, today's code. So I need just a little bit more. The code says that you can have a minimum of height 7.5 feet, but it's for existing basement. If you have 7.5, then it's okay to live in it, then it's fine. But when you build new, when you build on trusses, when you got to have 7 3/4 steps, you do not actually have enough headroom to build. So that's why we're asking for a little bit more height so we actually can build and make it a livable space.
So what's there today is what's left from the original building?
Today, there is left the foundation only.
So
There is nothing else in it.
So are you planning on reusing that for the most part then?
We're going to use the entire foundation. The problem is we have 55 feet pylons put in the ground, cedar pylons. So that's significant soil issues.
So it's on pylons right now?
What's
that? It's on pilings right now?
That's correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Commissioner Lee?
What is the existing ceiling height right now in the basement?
89 inches.
What is the new ceiling height in the basement going to be?
So we're going to have 96.
8 foot 10.
It's actually 8 feet.
8 feet.
All right, so your 8 foot 10 that you're showing on your drawing is to the bottom of the joist. Is that?
We do not show 8 feet 10, we show 8 feet.
It says 8 foot 10 on there.
8 foot 10, it shows to the top, maybe off the joist, but maybe there is something wrong in the plan. But we actually changed the floor system to a 14 inches instead of a 20 inches. That's allowed for the max span of 26. So we are decreasing the floor system, and this is the max we can do. And also, we want to have only 8 feet. And I believe as right now, because of the flood zone, we have to increase the basement floor by 6.6 inches.
Well, I'm just going by your drawings. So your drawings show it to the bottom of the trusses, 8 foot 10. So
I don't have a copy of it, but if I can take a look at it.
So what you're saying is potentially it's 8 foot 10 to the top of the first floor.
Just give me 1 second, I'll look at it.
I don't believe that up there. Which is right. It's a 14-inch TGI.
You are correct, and this was done. This is a mistake. We are actually asking for 8 feet, and we're going to be changing this. So somehow we got a mistake on the plan, but that can be changed.
Site plan does. Site plan does show.
It's actually to here. It's to the bottom.
So this would have gone to the top.
So I think what we're seeing is your site plan calls it out correctly, but your section plan does not. Like an extra 10
That
inches.
is correct.
Does that sound right?
Yes, and I apologize for it.
So we'll need to make sure that's a condition on here that gets updated and built to the previous one. Are there any more questions for the applicant?
How many steps up are you going to have up to the porch?
Back or front?
Front.
3.
How many?
3.
3 steps, and you said 1, 2, 3, and then one more onto the porch, or is it 1, 2, and then the third step you're on the porch?
There is going to be 3 steps, 4 risers.
Okay, and then the fourth step is the porch.
That is correct.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking that is because from an elevation standpoint, it looks very tall, according next to the neighbors. There's a lot of height on this. There are a lot of roof lines. It's a significant mass. So I wouldn't be looking at this if you could do it without a variance. And true, we're talking 4 inches or 3 inches, but that's irrelevant to me. To me now, I'm looking at everything. So I don't think an 8-foot ceiling height in the basement is excessive, but you've also got a 9-foot on the main floor, and then you want 8-foot up there, and then you've still got a big roof pitch. Somewhere in there, you could have subtracted out some inches to bring everything in relation. So you're making it an issue of this floodplain issue. It really isn't the issue. You're just trying to get the heights that you want to have, because you can actually do what you need to do without having to have a variance. So I think it's going to be difficult for me to support this, mostly on the principle of it.
So original, when we start to make the plans for a 26 feet span, you have to have 20 inches trusses. 9 feet on the main floor, it makes the house look nice, and then also 8 feet on the second floor, which we're doing 8 feet on the second, 8 feet in the basement. So what I've done is I've changed the floor system. Instead of floor trusses to TJI's joists, which is 14 inches, what I'm cutting 6 inches out. This is what I've done to make it better. But I still do not quite have enough height, and doesn't matter how I build on the main or second floor, I still need that 8 feet in the basement to put my stairs in, and for a tall person like me to be able to walk and not to bump my head into the headroom. And this is what I have the issue. Otherwise, the 3-4 inches wouldn't be too bad for the basement, but we do have a problem with the build when we put the stairs in, because we have to have 7 3/4 steps, and it's kind of a problem.
And there are ways to work around the headroom too. You could cut back on the first floor, open it up, make it an open stairwell. There's ways to do that.
That is correct, and there is ways when we have a nice ground, and you can put the support everywhere. But in this case, we're working on pylons, and we're working with the existing grade beams and stuff, and we kind of have to put the supports and the posts in a certain way to meet the building codes. So it's a little bit tough. It's not as easy that you would build on the regular on good soil. So.
One more comment. I just noted that you had shown on the drawings that you'd be raising the basement floor 6 inches. I think the slab said
6.6.
6.6. Okay. I think it would be closer to 7 inches. It's 0.7 feet. I think it was 0.6.
It's 6.6 inches for the basement floor.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Carr.
I'm just confused as to what the variance is for. Is it for 6 inches above what's allowed, or 4 inches? I know the staff report mentions 4 inches, and the applicant's narrative here mentions 6 inches.
It's actually he's, I believe, referring to how far up he has to bring the basement floor up, which in turn then affects how far He can have ceilings in the lower level, which then in turn affects the first floor elevation. He's allowed to go 1 foot above the existing first floor elevation. It will be 1 foot 4 inches, or a little over 1 foot 4 inches approximately.
Okay.
It's 4 inches.
Okay.
So we're talking about the first floor elevation, although the basement elevation has to be elevated 6.6 inches.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, the staff report says 1.33 feet, so are we rounding?
That's 4
No,
inches.
that's 4 inches.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not getting that same math. I somewhere, maybe it's the extra decimal, but the required additional increase in bringing up out of the ground is 0.6 feet. That, to me, is 7.2 inches. And on the drawings here, it says raise height of concrete floor by 6 inches. So I just want to make sure that he is out of the zone. Maybe you can check that. So my issue is that it's exactly that. Does this really require a variance? I think it can be accomplished, what needs to be accomplished to come out of that zone without a variance. I think some of the other issues are kind of self-imposed. So for that reason, I can't support this one.
Any other comments? Commissioner Scheer.
I will support it. I not only do I think the number is de minimis, I'm reminiscent of some situations we've reviewed in other parts of the city with floodplain issues, with doors being elevated, and we, as I recall, have allowed as high as 9-foot ceilings in a basement in some of those circumstances because the market required that. So I don't find this an excessive requirement, and I think from a consistency standpoint with others that we've reviewed and given the floodplain issue, I'm in support.
So if, any other questions for the applicants? Otherwise, this is a public hearing, so we should, to get that out of the way. Okay, if you guys want to sit down. Are there any, again, it's public hearing, if anyone wants to come forth and make any comments to this, feel free, now is your time. Seeing none, I'd take a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Have a second? Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. So back to commission. Any other, Commissioner Forrest?
I agree that with Commissioner Sharon that I think this is a reasonable and rather minimal change, and it's being done to address a problem. Digging around in the building code today, I found out it changed in January. In an existing basement, you can have as little as 6.5 feet, or a little less than 6.5 feet, and not change it. But now they've taken off the top of the house. This is the time to fix it. I was also wondering, is 8 feet really the best, the most reasonable number? And I read that it is considered pretty standard, especially if you want to have a finished basement, to be able to do that, and also for the headroom issue. And I've lived in several houses where I bonked my head going downstairs, so I totally am sympathetic with that one. So I will support this.
Any other comments or motions?
I would recommend approval with staff's conditions.
Is there a second? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Discussion. Excuse me. Any discussion?
I'm wondering if we should ask that the plans be adjusted to accurately reflect the measurements of the basement.
Mr. Chair, I think we can amend the motion to indicate that the first floor elevation shall be 880.43 as indicated on the proposed site plan. And that way it takes care of the error that's on the interior drawings, the cross-section drawings.
Is that acceptable to the motion in a second? Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Did you get that, Jackie? 2 nays. Hobbs and Lee. Motion passes. Thank you. Up next, Carrie, the Blake Woods preliminary plat.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. Before you is a preliminary plat. Its property is located up in the northwest corner of the city. It's just west of Blake Road, south of Evanswood Lane. The site consists of 4 properties owned by the applicant, shown on the screen. There are 2 existing homes. One home accesses off of Evanswood Lane, and the other off of Blake Road here. The other 2 parcels are vacant. A little closer look of the property. As you can see, it's relatively heavily wooded. What the applicant is proposing here is to combine those 4 lots and create a 7-lot subdivision, so 3 new lots. This is a look at the subdivision as proposed, somewhat similar to the Acres du Bois subdivision that was recently approved and under construction up in Morningside, with a cul-de-sac coming in off of Blake Road. There would be about 100 trees removed as a result of the construction of the new road and the building pads. The applicant has tried to design a plat here to try to save as many trees as they can. Obviously, when building a road and 6 new homes, there would be some tree loss. The new building sites would be subject to our new tree ordinance when those building permits were applied for. So the 7 lots that are proposed here meet all of our minimum lot size requirements. As the council recalls, any time that properties are larger than 9,000 square feet in area, or at least in a general neighborhood where lots are larger than 9,000 square feet, the median of all homes within 500 feet becomes the standard. So it's the median lot area, lot width, and lot depth of all those homes taken within 500 feet. So when running that calculation, the surveyor, the minimum lot size here is 21,842 square feet, lot width at 120.8, and the depth 166.4. So these are quite large lots compared to our 9,000 square foot general standard. This is a look just quickly at the 500-foot radius where that calculation was created. So again, all lots meet our minimum standards. So the request before the Planning Commission is a subdivision. It's a preliminary plat to create the 7 new lots out of those 4 existing lots. So primary issue, is the proposed plat reasonable for the site? Staff believes it is. Again, this all meets our minimum lot size requirements. So they're entitled to this subdivision with those 7 lots. So just to go into a little more detail on the plat, they're proposing a 24-foot wide street that would come in with the cul-de-sac. You can see there is a center island here. There's a series of rain gardens to collect drainage. As you'll hear tonight, I believe in the public hearing, drainage is a significant issue in this neighborhood. Really everything around it is at capacity. There's a pond to the west that's at capacity, can't take any more water. So drainage is really the primary issue here this evening. With the 24-foot wide, it's a little bit more narrow than our typical standard of 27 feet. Similar with the Acres du Bois project, the fire marshal would recommend that, given that 24-foot wide lot, that the homes be sprinklered and that it be marked for just no parking on one side of the street, so only allow the one side parking. This was reviewed for by engineering in regards to our living streets policy, and they are recommending a 5-foot sidewalk along the south side of the road that would connect up with, there's an existing sidewalk on the east side of Blake Road. The Fire Marshal and Public Works have reviewed the plans, and they're okay with that center island. They believe they still can do the maintenance around the cul-de-sac there. WSB conducted a traffic study. I know there's not a significant impact on traffic here. They did run the numbers, and there is a slight increase, 5 a.m. peak hours increased and 6 in the p.m. But we wanted to have them take a look at the spacing between intersections. As you can see in the graphic here, there's the new road would come in this location here. So it's somewhat tight. It's not ideal, but the study does conclude that it is workable. Chuck Rickard is here from WSB to answer any questions that we may have in that regard. In regard to park dedication, with the creation of 3 additional lots here, $5,000 per lot would be required. But in conclusion, the staff report indicated there may be some drainage and grading and drainage issues. We thought we were going to be presenting a plan this evening that solved some of the issues that engineering had and the watershed district, but we're not there yet. So given those issues, and just how this should specifically be graded and where the drainage should go, we haven't got satisfactory answers. So we would suggest that this item be tabled until some of those details are worked out with Ross and the watershed district. And Ross is here. He's been working closely with the applicant to better go into some of those issues. But with that, I can stand for any questions that you may have. And we would suggest that you hold the public hearing, as is our standard. You may even want to hold it open, the public hearing, until you can take act, until it's brought back with those grading and drainage plans.
So when you say tabled, are you recommending it goes to the next meeting, or when are you proposing?
Yeah, just continue
that?
to the next meeting, correct.
Which would be March 11th,
March 11th.
I believe.
And that's assuming they work those issues out.
Yeah, just a second. I'm sorry, what was that, Kerry?
That's just assuming they work those issues out.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand what you're recommending and what the dates would be on that, just so everyone's clear when it may come back. So, if you have a general question, Commissioner Lee.
Carrie, back to your lot dimensions for those lot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You referred to that the calculations were done based on median and average areas, widths. I guess I'd like to better understand exactly which properties generated that data. Is it that shaded area? Because that's
Yes.
quite a lot of properties.
It is.
All
It's all this shaded area.
Okay,
You can't read it on the screen, but here's the data behind it over on the right.
So I'm just thinking out loud that there's quite a variety of different lot sizes in that. And sometimes it might be more relevant to look at what's happening in the most immediate area surrounding those homes. But that was my question. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, that's a debate that we've certainly had here, especially when there's variances involved. There's not with this one, but we have had that discussion where there's greater impact immediately around the subdivision. But with this one, there's no variance. But this is how we define the neighborhood within 500 feet.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Carrie? Commissioner Carr.
Planner Teague, did you indicate that the tree preservation ordinance would apply to this?
It would.
It would. Okay, and then that landscape plan would be submitted at what point in time?
Yeah, it would be primarily reviewed at the time of a building permit for each individual home.
All right, thank you.
Just back to that second. So that ordinance doesn't go into effect until July 1st, right?
That's correct.
So you're assuming that the building permits for these would not come in until then?
Generally, it depends on the timing here. The road has to be
just to be clear, so it only would anything after July 1st. I mean, per what it's sitting at today. So
And the applicant is very mindful of the trees. They would like to save as many as they can. I should point out that the property owner lives right here. Again, very similar to the Morningside subdivision, where the applicant lives right within the development.
Additional questions for Carrie? Oh, Commissioner Scheer. Pardon? You're up.
Carrie, just curious, at the time that you mentioned that the Living Streets had weighed in on this and suggested the sidewalks, were they aware at the time they were making that recommendation that we have significant drainage problems on the property?
Yes.
Okay. I just observed that given the drainage problems that already exist, when we're really dealing with, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 properties that will access the road, all that additional concrete seems a bit unnecessary to me.
Actually, there's only 5 that would really go to that sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I was on the Living Streets subcommittee, and I would not support a sidewalk here based upon that. It's for 5, and back to that hardscape question, I think we're in a cul-de-sac that I wouldn't agree with that recommendation, for the record.
Yeah, given the
concur.
drainage.
Thank you.
Given the drainage issues, that should be considered here.
Yeah. Additional questions for Carrie? So I would just like to say, I for the most part agree with, the rest of the commission with Carrie's assessment on if the grading and the drainage isn't resolved to the city's satisfaction on, my opinion would be to continue this. Having said all that, we can certainly do the public hearing and potentially keep that open along the way too. So I don't know if there's any, just so we're upfront on that, if there's any comments for or against. I guess I want to put that out there right now. Okay. Having said that, the applicant would be up next if you want to come up and tell us about your project and what else is going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Kendra Lindahl. I'm here tonight representing the property owners. Frank Berman was here tonight. He flew in. He's smarter than me. He actually is wintering in Palm Springs, although his permanent home is here. He did fly in for the meeting, and upon learning it was tabled, he decided to go home tonight and catch his early flight in the morning. So I do have with me, though, Reed Schultz, who is our designer on the project, if we do have specific questions. We did learn that it's tabled. We have gone through the conditions that are actually attached to the resolution and generally agree with those conditions. There's a few that we'd like to modify. Tabling the item tonight does allow us to work with engineering staff and resolve them. We had a couple directives from our client, the landowner, when we started this project. And the first was to preserve trees. And so we've been tracking the tree preservation ordinance. We've been sitting in the back of the room for a few months. Glad that got adopted, and we understand it will apply when building permits come in. The second direction was to prepare a subdivision that complies with the ordinance with no variances. So preserving trees and avoiding variances were key for us, and we think we've done that. We're anxious to work with the engineering staff and resolve the questions that they do have. We were prepared tonight to do a full presentation, but in light of the tabling tonight, I think I'll keep it brief. We are here to answer questions. Again, our entire goal here was to preserve as many trees as possible. That's why the road is on the north side. We did hold a neighborhood meeting. The 3 primary concerns, and I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone, were tree preservation, traffic, and drainage. And so we have been working to address those. We think we can do that before your next meeting. We're hopeful that we can do that before your next meeting and be back here again for a recommendation for approval. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions, or again, detailed engineering questions Reed can answer on behalf of our team.
Any questions, comments for the applicant? I have a couple. So again, back to the sidewalk comment, I wouldn't agree with the sidewalk here based upon that. That's my opinion. And then also on the traffic report, it looks like you have an extra house in there. There's one there today, so you said 6 new ones. Wasn't there only 5 new ones here? If you want to, there's 2 homes on these lots today, right? There'll be 7 total.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that was probably my error. I thought that one was going to be taken down, so it's a worst case condition. I added additional traffic for that 6th house. So
yeah, I just wanted to
Yep.
be fair to everyone that
Yep.
that's really what's happening, and
So the
it
traffic numbers
probably
are-
doesn't make a
Yep.
huge amount of difference. I agree, but just as a bookkeeping thing, make sure that so we get the right amount of traffic on that piece.
Yep, that would have been I thought that house was being taken down.
Okay.
If I could clarify too, that there are 2 houses out there today. One will be removed. One will remain. So there will be 6 new homes. 7 total.
6 new homes, but there's 2 existing homes.
Yeah.
So one net increase of 5.
Correct. There actually used to be 3. That flag-shaped lot used to have a house that was
Yeah,
removed.
I didn't
a number
count
of
that one.
years ago.
There's the one that's there today that someone is using. I assume it's rental or whatever's going on, but so that there's a 5 net house gain. Correct. I think we're in agreement. Any other, Commissioner Carr?
I would just like to comment on the sidewalks, and having been on the Living Streets Advisory Task Force, I would actually be in favor of sidewalks if the drainage issues are resolved. And of course, the reason for the sidewalks are they are pedestrian friendly. This is a neighborhood of families, I'm assuming. They may have children, and especially with a narrow street that's going in there, this will allow children to walk and bike on the sidewalk and have access to the main road. So I would encourage a sidewalk. I think that's an attractive feature for all the reasons that the Living Streets Advisory Task Force has set forth in their policy. Obviously, drainage considerations have to be taken into account, and that may dictate which side of the road it goes on, but I would be in favor of the sidewalk.
Commissioner Olson.
Thanks. Okay, so if they do build the sidewalk, that'll be within the right-of-way, and it won't impact the rain gardens or any of that, or I don't know who I'm asking that to.
That's correct, that would.
Okay. And then,
Yeah, you can answer that if
Okay.
you wish.
Actually, the way it's written, it would impact. I am concerned about the drainage if the sidewalk were required on the south side of the street. If the city would like us to install the sidewalk, we do have a plan where we show that it can work on the north side, but on the south side, because we're trying to capture and hold the rainwater on site, it really creates some challenges if it has to be on the south side. So that was one of the things I wasn't going to get into details about tonight, but I'm happy to, and Reed can certainly talk about that.
so it could work on the north side.
Yes,
Do
we look for your direction.
Right.
Would that have an impact to the trees on the north side or anything?
It wouldn't
An adjacent
impact
property
tree
owner?
removal. It certainly brings improvements closer and reduces that amount of green boulevard between the property owners on the north and the street. But because the street is being built in the same location as that existing driveway for the house that's no longer there, the sidewalk simply reduces the green space but doesn't remove any more trees than would be affected under the current plan.
Okay.
On the north side, if it's installed on the north side.
Just the last one, and maybe this is for you, Ross, but do we know kind of like what the issues are, and are they going to be resolvable? Or maybe it's back to you, Kendra. But do we have an idea of what significance or?
Maybe a 30-second summary.
We received a stormwater management, actually, we received a data modifying stormwater management report from January late last night, and we had a few hours to look at it today, and there are still large unresolved issues with the stormwater management.
And this is going through the watershed district as well?
It will. It hasn't yet.
It hasn't so far?
It has not.
Okay.
And so to resolve these issues, are there going to be significant changes to the plan or the additional ponding or what, or you don't know yet? Or?
I can't foresee any of that. That would be up to the applicant to propose.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Forrest?
Mr. Bittner, I was wondering, could you tell us when it will go through the watershed? Will that happen prior to our receiving it next?
Prior to receiving final plat and after receiving preliminary plat.
Okay, so I'll be in between the two steps of the plat approval.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Oh, Commissioner Hobbs. You almost got away.
Close. Are there any options for any kind of pervious surface for the sidewalks, and would that even potentially help the situation?
There's options for pervious surfaces for all hard surfaces. There's often an economic component, and there's often alternatives that applicants can use to manage stormwater rate and volume. So yes, but we control none of those.
Okay.
Thank you. So, although do you have another? Okay. So, although this was or is being tabled and everyone's come out tonight, I would open the public hearing if anyone wants to speak tonight. They feel free to come up and have their 3 minutes. Having said that, you're also welcome to come back for the next meeting on March 11th. So I want to give you that option. Whatever you'd say here tonight would also be on the record. So if you hear tonight and want to say something and don't come back, that's fine too. So at this point, open up for public testimony.
Point of order. If we haven't tabled it yet, because that requires a motion, so,
We haven't tabled it yet.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, so we're going to have a public hearing and then continue it, but I do appreciate the fact that you're saying they can come back and speak again at the next meeting, because then they'll have the information to address. That's good.
True, but if people came here tonight, I just want to give them that option as well. Okay. So if anyone wants to come forth, if you'd step up to the mic, you have 3 minutes. If you give us your name and address, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Wallen. I live at 6208 Parkwood Road. So I directly abut this subdivision, and there's a number of things I'm concerned about. I would like to go to Commissioner Lee's point, which is the lot sizes. Our lots are significantly larger in the Parkwood Knolls area, and so I frankly never expected 7 houses going in behind us. That's a surprise. I think we purchased our house with the expectation that there would be sort of a general feeling in our neighborhood, so this is a huge change. I also have the lot in which the house, one of the homes in the subdivision will be the closest to our lot line. So we're definitely probably the most affected of anyone. The second thing I want to point out is that the drainage problem is a serious problem. I have a swamp in my backyard, so it is absolutely maxed out. And I can't imagine how this is going to make this any better. So I'm very concerned at the next meeting to hear what the proposals are. This has been an ongoing issue for homes on our street. And I feel like the discussion of sidewalk versus no sidewalk is kind of a minor detail here, given the larger issues with the water in our neighborhood. The last point is a lot of the trees have already been removed. I realize that people own land, they have a right to have a subdivision. However, it's torturous to have watched this. And so I don't know if we have a lot of confidence, or at least the people I've talked to, that we have a lot of confidence about some of these things remaining. I understand there is an ordinance, but of course most of the trees are gone already. So those are my commentary. I'll be back March 11th. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charlie Gitz, and our family has lived on 5311 Evanswood for 15 years. And I'm friendly with Frank, our neighbor. I understand there's a significant amount of money for him developing the lots, but there's also a significant amount of financial impact to all the surrounding homes. Glad she mentioned the drainage. I'd like, has been talking with Reed, I've been talking to Ross, and we don't have a swamp in our backyard. We have a lake. Because if you look at where the proposed thing is, first of all, it's a spectacular woods. But if any of you have been to the site, you know you drive north on Blake Road up a hill. And at the peak of the hill is the proposed new road. And if you come up west from Evanswood, you also come up a road, up a slope. So you don't need to be an environmental engineer to understand that the the land slopes to the west from Blake Road, to the south from Evanswood, and it sits all back in this little area there. And so, how do I go to the next one? Oops, there we go. So, all of the water, it sits, this is my house area right here. All of the water sits on both sides of the lane here. And I have a sump pump that I installed 15 years ago, and I pump the water to the street, and it goes down Evanswood. After a snow melt in the spring, it's a lake. It's a massive lake that goes all the way in our backyard over to the lot over here. On the other side, it's muck, it's trees, but no one really knows about it because it's a lot of buckthorn. They've cleared it out, but here's my little sump pump there, okay? I didn't have anything of the melt, but this is just a small summer rain. There's more. I really urge you to think about it. The second thing was the trees, and I've spoken with Frank about it, and this is the lane coming in. All these trees are scheduled to be removed. This is more of the lane. Look at the massive oaks there. Those are all being removed because here's the old driveway and the 24-foot to the south. That'll be for City Street. This is a monster red oak, 36 inches, will be removed. Here's another one. Our kids think this is the biggest tree in Edina. This is this is the lot to the west of us. Look at those oaks. I don't know how a 5,000 square foot home with a 3-car garage is going to exist with those woods. Here is looking southwest. Here is looking directly west. So they've removed a lot of trees. There's a lot to be remained. So if any of you have not seen the site, I really urge you to go and look. I'd love to have it repurposed, but we're going to have to live with some sort of development. I'd like to see the lot sizes, or at least maybe consider 1 or 2 homes back there. But I don't know how they're going to do it with the water, frankly, because if it flows back down to that pond in Westwood Court, that'll certainly flood. I mean, I have seen it. I have seen it. So that's all I have to say. I again encourage you to, if you haven't seen it, to go and see the majestic oaks there, and then take a look at the way the ground slopes, and you get a better idea of the water issues we have. So thanks.
Would anyone else like to comment?
Hi, I'm Olaf Mingy. I live on Evanswood Lane, 5225 Evanswood. So I'd agree with the comments on the water and the drainage issues, but I was going to talk about the road size. So 24 feet, I believe, is the minimum or required by Edina, and that's what is being proposed. That's quite narrow, as you can imagine. Coming out onto Blake Road, there's visibility issues, particularly in that area. Evanswood coming out onto Blake, I have to creep out little by little to see what's coming. Traffic is going very quickly there, and we don't have the same visibility issues. I think it would be worse for this road. Our road, I don't know the exact dimensions, but I'm guessing is at least 35 feet. So a 24-foot road exiting onto Blake would be a challenge. The other thing with the road width is, if there are families living in those homes, it would be difficult for kids to be out playing if there's cars coming in, if there's a car or two parked on that street. Now, maybe there aren't cars there parked often, I don't know. But even on our street, I wish there was a sidewalk, and we are on a cul-de-sac on Evanswood. Often we've talked in the neighborhood about, what if we just paid for ourselves to put in a sidewalk? Because cars coming through there don't have a lot of visibility. Let's see. Yeah, and so the sidewalk would be nice. That wasn't part of the original discussion. That's just something that I heard for the first time tonight. But if it did go on the south side of that road, it certainly would directly interfere with the rain garden. So that would have to be completely replanned. If it went on the north side of that road, and if they don't move the road south then to make room for it, then it's eating into, I believe, what was the 8 feet of buffer between the road and the property. And so that would be, quite a bit to put into that zone right up abutting to the other existing homes that probably weren't ever planning on having a road or sidewalks right on that property line. And I wouldn't be clear on who would do snow removal. If the sidewalk were on the other side of the road from the homeowners, who would be responsible for snow removal. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Amy Mingy, and I live at the same address, 5225 Evanswood Lane. I was just, I have a couple of issues. I was a little skeptical of the numbers with respect to lot size. I guess, I think, Carrie, you had maybe said that, or maybe it was Kendra who said it, but the lot size, the average lot size for the area, or the minimum required lot size, is determined by going out, with a 500-foot radius from the proposed development, and looking at those lots within that 500-foot radius. But that line, based on the map that you showed, that line cuts through lots. So what I'm wondering is, let's say like we have a half-acre lot. If it just cuts across the 500 feet, just cuts across the corner of our lot, then do you take the whole lot size? So anything that touches that line, okay? Because those lot sizes, just eyeballing it, seems smaller than what's around it. But I guess I would have to run the numbers. But that was, so anyway, if that line covers just a corner of a lot, you count that whole lot, and you don't fraction it in or something.
The whole lot counts.
The whole lot counts.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's hard to see how those numbers worked out. I'd have to look myself. And are those? I'm assuming that those numbers then are public.
Yeah,
part of the public record. No. Okay.
They're all in the package here, and
okay.
We can get them all to you if you want, and post it if you want.
Sure. Okay. Because that is interesting. And then, I think there was just a minor error when we were talking about where the street would go. There is a driveway for the existing yellow house that is in that area, And then there's also what looks like, an old driveway or a path. And I was under the impression that the road was going to go where the path is and not where the driveway is. But I think I've heard it talked about both ways tonight. So I'm, I guess, unclear about where the road would go. So that's something that I would want to be determined, because if it goes down the path is narrow and there are more trees there, then obviously there aren't any trees on the existing driveway. So
we can have somebody come up and talk to that one.
Sure, because it makes a big difference in terms of the number of trees that would come down. And then, of course, the drainage issue, everyone's talked about that. It's what happens is the land goes up in that area, and then there's this dip. And so I guess my concern is if this dip gets filled in, is the water going to splash over, and drain away from that area towards our area? So those are my questions and comments.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Annalisa Carlson. I live at 5228 Evanswood Lane. And I just want to make mention to the fact that my little boy has thought that the Charlie Gitson family have a large swimming pool because we always see water being pumped out onto the street. So it's a constant part of our lives seeing water flow down Evanswood Lane. So I just cannot emphasize enough that the water issue needs to be looked at. And also the density in this area just doesn't make sense in the context of this neighborhood. And where we live, up in the park, we identify with the Parkwood Knolls part of Edina, and I understand that it's a 500-foot radius around the proposal. However, if you look at the context of where this will go, it really is not similar to what is around it and what it will kind of identify with as far as a neighborhood. I also would really encourage you all to take a look at the safety of this new road coming out onto Blake. As it's been mentioned, as we creep along out on Evanswood and try to get out onto Blake, there are near accidents all the time, whether we're turning left, turning right. So with putting a new road in, it's going to be 3 very close roads: Evanswood, this new road, and then Parkwood Road. So we don't have a crosswalk there either. So the point of having a sidewalk is, to me, sort of irrelevant. I mean, there's going to be 5 houses or 7, or I don't know why the sidewalk in and of itself is really going to make that big of a difference. So thank you.
Hi, Andy Barnes, 5228 Evanswood Lane also. I think this plan might look better on paper, and with the traffic studies that we read, I think it looks better on paper than it is in real life. I think from a livability standpoint, this project doesn't make much sense. On Evanswood Lane alone, there are 10 young kids, and just the idea of all of these construction vehicles coming in, building these lots that, and building several houses, 5, 6, one's going to be a tear down, so 5 new houses and a tear down rebuild. That's an incredible amount of construction noise and traffic and really danger for the kids in our neighborhood too, over who knows how long it's going to take to build those lots. And we'd welcome new neighbors, but as Charlie Gitz said, this many lots probably doesn't make sense back there on so many levels, and I think that safety and density and livability is just one of those levels. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chris Johnson. I live at 5308 Highwood Drive West, which is not as close as these other folks to the development, but I'm within the 500-foot radius. I'm on the east side of Blake Road. And so my concern personally would have more to do with traffic and the effect on Blake Road. Although it does seem as though probably the water issues are probably more important. But one question or comment, and I make it now in case that it would be looked into before the March 11th meeting when this might come up again. Mr. Teague said that the sidewalk would connect to the sidewalk which is currently on the east side of Blake Road. Now, it would have to cross Blake Road, and so that makes me wonder if there will be some kind of official crosswalk going from that sidewalk across Blake Road, and if so, are there implications on traffic if there's a crosswalk there? I don't know. I don't have a particular comment. I'm just putting out the question if that needs to be looked into. Second, I don't think that the photos that Mr. Gitz showed, which showed what the other woman referred to as the path, which as I look at the drawings is where the road is proposed to go. If you want to call it a path, I suppose it's the old driveway for the house that was once back a ways and is no longer there. But the path, if you want to call it that, goes up notably from Blake Road, and if the road would have the same gradient as the existing old driveway or path, it makes me wonder what would be the situation when, say, this time of year or after an ice storm, a car was coming out of that road and needed to stop at the stop sign, which I'm sure would be there when it gets to Blake Road. The other roads which come into Blake Road right in that area, Evanswood and Pine Grove and Parkwood, all come right to Blake Road in a fairly level fashion, although Evanswood does slope uphill, as was noted. There is sort of a runout area right at Blake Road, which is, I'm sure, good engineering design for roads. If the same were to be done with this new street, I think they would have to cut down fairly significantly into the existing slope in order to accomplish that. Also, the house just to the north has significant retaining wall to Blake Road, and I wonder how...
You could just wrap up quick there.
Right. I wonder how much the view to Blake Road would be affected because of the fact that there is this existing retaining wall on the north side of where this new road is going to go. So that's...
Thank you. Any other comments? Otherwise, I heard a couple of questions I think that could be answered here. The first one is on where the drive is actually proposed. I don't know if we can bring up a plan just to show that quick. I believe it's on the path as you speak, but we can, if you want to bring that up and show that.
Kerry might be able to pull it up on his exhibits as well. This is the proposed plan.
Hang on just a second, we'll get you a microphone.
This is the proposed street plan, and the curb cut is generally in the location of what is the old driveway for the flag lot. So it is generally in that same location.
And it's not where the yellow house driveway is today,
No,
correct?
the yellow house driveway is a little bit further south. I think right here is the curb cut for the yellow house driveway.
And that curb cut would
And that
be
would
removed.
go away.
Okay, thank you. And the other question that I heard was, I don't know, Carrie, if you want to address this, was if there's a sidewalk proposed there and that sidewalk is on the east side of Blake, was there a crosswalk talked about? I don't recall the discussion, or is it more of a comment?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I didn't see that in the recommendation, but that's a good question that we should pose to engineering and come back with the recommendation on that.
Okay. Thanks. With that, I won't call to close the public hearing because I think it could be continued to the next meeting as also. But unless there's any other comments, I would entertain a motion to continue this to the March 11th meeting. Commissioner Schroeder.
Well, since I won't be here on March 11th.
That's true.
I just I have a few comments and maybe a question or two that have come up since people have been talking. And maybe Mr. Ricketts is directed to you. In the traffic analysis, there are 2 lots of record that would be exiting onto Blake Road. So does the traffic analysis assume 6 new lots, or the difference between the two existing lots of record and the new lots that would be created along the new street? Because I think you indicated the worst-case scenario, which might actually be a factor of like 33% more in terms of the lots, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, you're exactly right. I assume that there would be one lot still coming off of, or two lots actually coming off of Evanswood now, and the other 5 lots would be coming off of Blake Road. 5 new lots would be coming off of.
And that would be
cul-de-sac.
compared to 2 lots of record, so there's really 3 additional lots of traffic.
Exactly.
Existing, that would come onto Blake Road.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I had 2 other comments. One, I understand people's concern about the increased density, but this property owner has a right to develop according to existing ordinances. And for us not to approve this, when they're not asking for variance, would be taking away a development right that will exist for every other property owner in the city who would want to do something with their property, and we can't do that. And then finally, just kind of on that minor issue of the sidewalk, we're talking about a sidewalk that serves 5 lots, and I think as we've looked at other properties, we have talked about the Living Streets policy and the need to accommodate pedestrian activity, but it would seem like with just a little bit of creativity, this notion of a sidewalk along the south side could be accommodated, because you don't need to, if you would just think about the ribbon curb that exists on the south side at 2 feet wide, adding 3 more feet of concrete, you could have a 5-foot differentiated walkway surface that could accommodate cars when it needs to and could accommodate people when it needs to. It doesn't add any more surface area to the hard surface and would essentially accommodate in a creative way the need to accommodate pedestrians in the same 24 feet that exists out there today. So I think we should be pushing on the Living Streets policy. I think it's a good policy. We just need to be a little creative in how we apply it. That's it.
Any other comments before we, Commissioner Forrest?
What will we do without you, Michael? I just wanted to say that there was a question about the grade, and we do have a diagram in the plans that was, at least for this iteration of the plan, that addresses how they would grade that road and how they would cut it down and reduce the inclines on it. So if anybody is interested, you can view the plans, and take a peek at it and get more information from City Hall.
Yeah, as Commissioner Forrest mentioned, everything that's been presented tonight in our package, that's all part of the public record. So again, you can contact the city to get a copy if you wish at this point. Commissioner Carr.
I would move that we table the Berman application for a subdivision until March 11th, or until at such time as they submit satisfactory drainage plans.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any additional comments? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. So we'll see many of you on March 11th, sounds like. Thank you. Except, yeah, I mentioned that. Just for the public hearing is continued. We didn't take a motion to close that. So again, you can come back on March 11th if you wish. Thank you. So up next is the reports and recommendations. As we mentioned earlier, Vision Edina has been postponed till March 11th. Just a little bit on that. That is online right now, and I think, Carrie, did you send out a copy to the Planning Commission for that? So I think everyone's had access to that, at least right now, and for any of the public watching also, that's on the city's website. I believe Ms. Kurt was going to come in and kind of give us the summary version of it, correct? So it's out there for everyone to look at this point. After that, the next item up is planning in the greater Southdale area, and I believe Carrie and Commissioner Schroeder have put together a PowerPoint to discuss that and potential way forward on those pieces. So if you want to bring that up now.
You can click. Mr. Chair and members of the Commission, this is something that was brought up as we looked at 7200 France and the issues that resulted coming out of our review of that project and then the City Council's review of that project. And having discussions with at least 2 council members and then more discussions with the chair, we thought it would be worthwhile to consider a process that might actually bring some resolution to this. And so this discussion is essentially the same as was shared with the City Council and Planning Commission at a workshop last Tuesday, not yesterday, but the week before. And so as a way of kind of moving this forward, Carrie and I have put together a PowerPoint that's essentially the same. Actually, it is the same information that was shared with the at the workshop. And we thought because some of you weren't there, we would bring it back here. And then I think if this is viewed positively, it will be brought forward to the City Council for consideration. Carrie, if you can go to the next slide. There's a series of and you all, I think, received a copy of this kind of outline. But there's a reason to do this because when we look at the comprehensive plan, of which I'll come back to in a minute, there's a need for relooking at it. I'll explain some of the rationale behind that in a minute. Really, what the intent is to establish an engagement process that brings together residents, stakeholders, representatives of the city to look at an area that's identified in the comprehensive plan as an area of potential change, and to focus on the west side of France Avenue first, since that seems to be the pressure point for development with the neighborhood immediately, and eventually expand the ideas that might come out of that more narrow process to looking at the greater Southdale area as a whole. Carrie, can you go to the next slide, please? So here's a portion of the comprehensive plan, and the way I would characterize this would be that we looked at this at the 7200 project, and we weren't all there, but it was a unanimous negative review on the process. When it actually moved forward to the City Council, the Council was split on it. The neighborhood's been quite active in indicating that there should be that if the 7200 project, for example, were to move forward, it should move forward in concert with the comprehensive plan. But what we had is 3 City Council members suggesting that the comprehensive plan should be amended, and 2 City Council members suggesting that they weren't sure it should be amended, which tells us that the comprehensive plan may not be the hard and fast policy guide that we might have imagined. If you can go to the next slide, Carrie, we can understand why that is.
I would just say many projects have come through and have amended the comprehensive plan. So this
that's correct.
Certainly is not the only one. In fact, most of the redevelopment in that area has needed a comprehensive plan amendment, just for the record here.
And our planning process allows for a developer to request
correct.
that.
Yep.
And if I could, the ones that have needed comprehensive plan amendments are the ones on the edges, the ones on the west side of France and the east side of York. Everything in the middle has not required a comprehensive plan change, with the exception of the beacon, but that was more about the use.
Yeah, it was about the use. So the Southdale apartments did not need a
correct.
Okay. So the majority of the things there have needed a comprehensive plan. Yes, thank you.
This diagram is also important. This is taken from the comprehensive plan, and I've actually put my favorite title on the slide. It's the different slide on the drawing. But this is the areas of potential change that were identified, and as we move through a period of coming up to 10 years of the existing comprehensive plan, we have begun to study several of these areas of potential change. Our comprehensive plan allows us to focus on these, and if you look at along the France Avenue corridor in the greater Southdale area, they're identified as areas 4 and 5, as areas where we would potentially look at studying land use changes under what exists in the comprehensive plan now through the small area plan process. So part of this, I didn't frame this discussion in terms of the small area plan process, but it does have a foundation for the Planning Commission to consider in the comprehensive plan, particularly because we are dealing with an area of potential change. We haven't defined this, and going back to the discussion, the dialogue that happened with the City Council, there is no conclusive direction for this area, so it really calls for some kind of change. So there's a rationale for it. It focuses on this. Carrie, you can go to the next slide, please. Basically, The comprehensive plan says we should be studying this area, and we haven't done that yet. We're coming up on 8 years since the comprehensive plan was adopted. In 2 more years, the comprehensive plan will be updated, and for those areas to continue to exist as areas of potential change without having studied in that time seems wrong, and it seems the Planning Commission should be taking an initiative, as it has with Grandview and Valley View, and actually started to understand what the change might be. We're also seeing now a lot of market forces that are suggesting that properties will change. 7200 is not the only property out there where we're likely to see change along particular, if we look at only the west side of the corridor, but if we look at other areas of in Southdale, the greater Southdale area, there's a lot of potential for change, and the market is going to continue to drive that. We contrast that with the amount of investment that we've seen going back 10 or 15 years in the past, and we really haven't seen significant reinvestment. So the time is right for change to happen here. We also look at the city's investment in France Avenue. Mr. Ricker's firm has been focused for several years in creating a more pedestrian accommodating environment along France Avenue. And as we look at the investment the city's made and the outside dollars that have been put into France Avenue, it seems we should be looking at patterns that are more supportive of the maybe more pedestrian accommodating realm that's being developed on France Avenue. Carrie, can you go to the next slide, please? So when we look at this, we know that the city has, and Carrie has talked about this, that the city has some technical work being planned for the Southdale area. But when we look at this from a small area plan perspective, there is a more aspirational perspective that the residents and probably the property owners might bring to it. So while there's a technical piece of this relating to traffic or storm sewer capacity, I think there also has to be some direction provided by what the vision for this area should be. When we look at 7200, I think it's just a microcosm of the pressure point that exists for the whole area because of its relationship with the Cornelia neighborhood. And while 7200 might be the current focus, as you move up or down the corridor, there might be other places where development pressures might create tension between the corridor and the neighborhood to the west. I think it's worth noting, and it was noted in the France Avenue study, that the areas along the west side of France Avenue are not homogeneous. They're not similarly situated. If you go north, where we have a Valley View Road that kind of intervenes between the properties, the commercial properties on the west side of France Avenue and the neighborhood, there's a different relationship there. And when we look at this as an area of potential change, I think we ought to be recognizing the ability for the west side of France Avenue in particular to be responding to different development pressures based on kind of contextual differences. And the last thing on the assumptions as we move through this, there are, as I noted for the Berman property, there are property owners with interest, there are neighbors with interest, there's a community interest in this, and we ought to be framing a process that when we look at it from moving from this comprehensive plan, that we need to be responsive to a whole range of stakeholder interests here, that it's not just property owners and the neighborhood, that this is a community corridor. It's identified as a community corridor in the comprehensive plan, and we ought to be looking at a pattern that results in high-quality, enduring projects. So the process that we've looked at and was shared with the City Council last week is to establish a representative work group, and I'll go back and talk about the composition of that work group. It's probably no different than what we've done in the other small area planning efforts. We've looked at this as 4 stages of work, each framed around a set of deliverables. It's important for each one of those processes to move on, and in order for it to move on, there's a point at which we create check-ins with the neighborhood and decision points with the Planning Commission and City Council. For the work group's efforts to move forward, there has to be agreement, and we've talked about this quite a bit as we move through planning processes, that we oftentimes focus on areas of disagreement, but when we actually move into these processes, we can focus on areas of agreement first and try and frame solutions to areas of disagreement in the context of those portions that we actually agree on. So the process of the check-ins and decision points allow us to stop. If we can't reach agreement, the process stops, and it goes back to the City Council for an ultimate decision. What I've suggested in this outline is that we focus on the west side of France Avenue, and then we expand supportable ideas across the whole of the Southdale area. And while we frame this as a small area plan, I think we need to put it into the context of the upcoming comprehensive plan update. So this may not actually lead to a comprehensive plan amendment immediately, but it could frame principles around how current development proposals might be accommodated, and eventually the ideas that come out of this might be reframed in the comprehensive plan update that the Commission will probably be starting next year. The comprehensive plan update being due to the Metropolitan Council, approved by the Metropolitan Council in 2018. So if we go to the next slide, Carrie, there's 4 stages of work, and I've highlighted them here, but what's important in each one of those stages is that there's 4 key activities. The first part of every stage is really to establish a dialogue amongst not just the work group, but the stakeholder group that comes together. The second is to create a series of work group sessions focused around first generating ideas that are responding to the issues that are raised by stakeholders, and moving through a process of clarifying intent and ideas and eventually establishing agreement. This process is modeled somewhat after the Grandview process, which in a very intimidating way suggested we had 10 meetings in 20 days, and I think there are members, there are representatives in the community who think we should be doing that again, and we may have to based on some of the parameters for deliverables. But the idea here is that the work really focuses back on a committed group of people, which I'll talk about, I think, on the next slide. And there is a need for working closely and quickly for at least the first 2 stages. The 4th step is always a progress check, and that's going back to the stakeholders and making certain that the ideas that are being agreed to by the work group are supported before they're actually brought forward in the 4th step, which is the agree to move forward or to stop. And that's when it's brought back to the Planning Commission or the City Council for their concurrence. The process is laid out like this. And so I've taken each of the 4 steps with each of the 4 work components of each step and laid them into a schedule. And admittedly, this is aggressive. The first task, which is we call organize and guide, is really orchestrated to deliver a set of guiding principles within a period of about 30 days. And it really does focus on how the Grandview process arrived at a set of 7 guiding principles, which are essentially maintained even into the framework plan that was developed, and that was the 10 meetings in 20 days. The second 30 days is organized around what I call a pattern dialogue, and that's really looking at a whole host of things that might include things like density, height, land use, but without speaking specifically to those topical ideas. I think it's important for a work group that comes together to be able to frame the discussion in terms that they define and not necessarily terms that we define for them as a planning commission. Stages 3 and 4, you can see, get to be longer, and they may actually be quite a bit longer than this, but I've framed them in terms of an aggressive work schedule where stage 3 is expanding the ideas that were supportable from stages 1 and 2 across the Southdale area, and the 4th one is really to begin to correlate the activities that come out of this with other city initiatives, the technical studies that Carrie has mentioned before. And that process might, and it's noted in the longer dialogue that you received, that process might actually expand even more than across the last 3 months of the process. You'll note here that in the last column where I talk about involvement, the public and work group are really the focus of this effort, the work group being involved in every single stage, the public being involved in 3/4 of every activity we have going on. If you look in the last column, there is a need eventually for outside technical resources, consultants. But as we found in the Grandview process, and I think even in the Valley View Wooddale, the first stages were initiated and guided by the residents and by members of the Planning Commission. And I think it's important that the Planning Commission, stakeholder group, the work group define kind of the aspirational aspects of this so that we have a consultant team, when there is a need for that, they're responding to the vision of the community instead of trying to frame the vision for the community. Carrie, can you go to the next slide, please? This is simply an attempt at defining two elements of the work group, and there's a series of appointments. In this case, we've numbered it at 6 that are essential appointed representatives coming from the Planning Commission, and then moving through appointments by the City Council to populate. Actually, if you add that up, that should be 8 and not 6. And that's, I guess, one of the things we ought to work on is math. But what becomes important here is that it's not just the Planning Commission. There are community-wide representatives, because as I noted, this corridor is important not just to the neighborhood and the people who own properties in the Southdale area, but to the community as a whole. There is, I think, a need for the City Council to define a neighborhood and a commercial property owner. There are community organizations that have an interest in this corridor, and they were very active in the France Avenue study that was done. And then there is a non-planning commission, perhaps from another commission representative that should populate this. If you go to the next slide, the work group of what we're calling nominated representatives are selected by the stakeholders, much as it happened in the Grandview process, where at the first meeting there was a self-selection process. And I think if we look at this, what we would probably do is modify the number of members from 3 to 4 so that there are also 8 nominated members to match the 8 appointed members. So you have a 16-member work group. And as happened in Grandview, and likely has happened at Valley View and Wooddale, it has to be a very committed group of folks coming together to make progress here. Carrie, you can go to the next slide, please. As a means of kind of moving this forward, and I'll just wrap up with this as the next steps, because it was suggested that we need to move forward quickly, and that this may be coming to the City Council. This may move forward to the City Council at their next meeting. It would be important for the Planning Commission to establish a work group and then use those appointments to review the work plan as a basis for the planning process. That it's not just a few of us, me. I talked with the chair here. I talked to one City Council member. That this that the work plan of work actually has a broader support and can be refined through a process of the initial Planning Commission appointments. That we move forward by seeking agreement from the City Council. That would be what would happen next week, and that the appointments actually to the work group happen there. And this is where it gets really tight, because if we want to do this in a 30-day period, we need to get people appointed. We need to advertise for the meeting. We really need to set tentative dates so that people who might self-select themselves to be a part of this process understand the commitment and the topics that will be discussed, particularly for stage 1. We need to organize how that first meeting is going to happen, not just in terms of the self-nominating process, but the activities that will happen during that first meeting. And most importantly, to review how this works within a 30-day timeline. I know that City Council members are interested in moving forward quickly. I know we have a developer out there who's waiting, and I think, Carrie, you can speak to their extension, but next week they're actually at the end of their 30-day extension. So they would have to agree to another extension of their timeline in order to even move through that quickly. Whether we can accommodate another 30-day extension and this process in that next 30-day window, I think, is something that the City Council and staff will have to work with that particular developer. So I'll stop there with that kind of brief overview and turn it back to the chair.
So I think this looks like a great plan as a starting point. Unfortunately, I missed last Tuesday, two Tuesdays ago with that. So thanks for all your time in this, Commissioner Schroeder and Planner Teague. I guess I'd open up for discussion for any comments to this.
At the work session, and I think this is just awesome what you've put together. Just a couple, I know I always ask for these clarifications, but if it's not an amendment, then will we use it as a guideline, or how do you see it?
I can respond a little bit to that, and then I'll let Carrie talk to it as well.
Yeah.
I think the process of amending a comprehensive plan can be rooted both in community process and principles and concepts. And the intent here is not to initially make a wholesale change, but to provide information that the city council can use with the action that's before them if they decide to, or if they wanted to return this to the planning commission, that there would be a little more information about how a comprehensive plan amendment might work, a little more guidance than what we have right now. Basically, right now, the only information we have coming back on why a comprehensive plan would be supportable is coming from a proponent of the change, not from the community. And so even a little bit of additional guidance in the form of first guidelines, perhaps, and maybe some pattern changes that might follow on would be helpful. It's not absolutely definitive.
Great. No, I agree. I guess that was my point, that even if it doesn't become an amendment, at least we need those guidelines.
Yeah, so I was saying, so it wouldn't necessarily be binding initially.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it would give some guidance.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a tool.
It's a tool, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I know I asked this too at the work session. So if it's not working, you stop the process, and then you go back. Wait, I can't reread my own writing. So then you take it back, but what do you take back?
Well,
for concurrence?
Commissioner Olson, I think if it's not working, we still have a plan in place. We have a comprehensive plan that's providing guidance right now.
So we say essentially just stay with it.
And what becomes important is that the city council and the neighborhood have differing opinions on whether the comprehensive plan is working or not working. What we couldn't decide is whether one property merited having a comprehensive plan amendment. We might have differing opinions on whether the comprehensive plan is right, but we never got to discuss that. We looked at it only in terms of one particular parcel. So I think what becomes important is if the process doesn't work, if we can't agree on a vision for evolving the west side of France Avenue or the whole of Southdale, we still have guidance in place in the form of the existing comprehensive plan.
Right.
And it simply means we can't agree on what it should be, and we fall back on what exists today.
It goes back to the parcel by parcel at that point, or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really a go hold, terminate type of thing.
Sure.
And if it comes to the point where I get is, it comes to a point where there's no consensus here at all, it goes away, or at least it stops, and we're not spending a lot of time spinning, and then it ultimately goes back to the comprehensive plan.
Right. And that's my fear if that happened, because so then we're back and we are still just kind of reacting to whoever.
Well, but we're going to try this.
No,
right?
I know.
Yeah, I mean,
that
could happen, but and then we're no worse off.
No, I'm not.
As we are now.
In the narrative that I drafted, I actually had a statement saying it's in the interest of the work group to find agreement, and it doesn't mean you have to have complete agreement on everything. We're taking this in stages, and the first stage is really to set a series of principles that people can agree to. And if there are things that people don't agree to, there's a lot of terms for it. People call it put in the parking lot, and it's dealt with later. But it's dealt with in terms of a set of things that people do agree with, and you use that as a point for debating points of disagreement.
Excellent. I just wanted to make sure that we could, because I think we will get some great stuff out of this. And go ahead. Steve.
Yes, Commissioner Hobbs.
Thank you. Is there anything in terms of just basic research that we need before we begin this process? Or do we have pretty much the basic data that we need to help formulate what we want to do?
Well, let me respond to that. So I think there are some studies going on right now. Having said that, I think data is a piece of it, but we still don't have what we vision for that area either. So I think this at least initial part is to try and get that vision, and then we're going to find out, and as we go forth, does it really support that? We're hoping it does, but so those are input pieces, and in my mind they shouldn't drive this process necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That they're not important, but it
I'm just wondering if there's some kind of basic information about what is possible that we have knowledge of in terms of, even just basic stuff in terms of, we obviously understand what's in the comprehensive plan, what we can do, but in terms of what our latitude is to be able to, from a soils, from a drainage standpoint, just kind of the cards that were dealt initially, the basic stuff that sets the table what's possible that can happen here.
The infrastructure, and I think that's probably part of the first process is to find out what we don't know too.
Yeah.
What information we do need.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah.
Because, in that time frame, there's just really no way to do the deep
Right.
engineering study that I think, or will be starting soon from, who's doing it? Mr. Rickard?
Possibly.
Possibly.
Yes, but, yeah,
So that's also ongoing, and part of that discussion may be, hey, what do we need to see as we progress also?
Yeah, I think you can look back to the proposal that was brought forward in 7200, and not that this is the end-all for this, but if their particular vision was for that particular project, for them to achieve that, they needed, in terms of stormwater management, they planned to accommodate back-to-back 100-year storm events. So if the vision is out there, it would seem that the development community will find a way to respond. And I think that as the chair was saying, we ought to be starting from the point of what the vision is. Make this first stage more aspirational, and then find a way for the infrastructure to align with what the vision is. If you look at this, the west side of France Avenue, it's been a long time since we've seen significant change. And this might be a real generational opportunity for the city to be looking at the west side of France Avenue.
And just to expand on the timing is perfect for this, to look at the land use piece while WSB or whoever does that infrastructure, looking at the roads, the utilities, sewer, water, what the capacity is. Right. So maybe we can form a vision for what that might look like, and we can run some alternative models for what can be supported.
I wish we had the data now. We don't, but we can't wait for it either in this case. Yeah, Commissioner Carr.
With this aggressive timetable and a large work group, one thing that wasn't mentioned in your outline is whether there's going to be a chair, because leadership will be really important to get this thing accomplished. So I'm assuming that there will be either a chair or a co-chair of this work group?
I think, again, the Grandview model is one to look at. That process did have a chair, but initially it had a position called a convener. And the notion behind the public engagement process there was intended to be very organic, as it is in this one. And I think what happens is the work group is formed, brought together by a convener. And once that group is brought together, as they're self-selecting the 8 additional members, they also self-select a chair or co-chairs.
Or the city council may appoint somebody to. I don't know. I mean, you want to get this done on your best time too. Absolutely agree. Yeah. Yep. Commissioner Forrest.
Just a few comments. I'm really happy to see this being initiated. This is excellent what you're putting forth here. My teeth hurt when I hear people say, "Well, the comp plan is, it's so old now. It's not valid." And this is good because we're working in light of the current comp plan.
I don't think anyone up here said that.
I'm not saying anybody up here said that, but I have heard it, and it's kind of like, oh, it's been around so long, that doesn't count anymore. And that's supposed to be a document that should guide us, but at the time, probably, we had high aspirations for a vision down there, but we were dealing a lot with, well, what's there now, and how would we want what's there now to expand? So this is a good thing. I think that this process is, the other thing is, when we've had other projects come before us that have required a comp plan amendment, in the comp plan, I believe it says that if something comes forward in one of these areas of potential change, that there should be a small area planning process. But then the comp plan says it is to be initiated by the city council. Well, there's a tension there because it says we should have that process, but the city council has never initiated it before. And I don't like that either. I think that, if we say we're going to do it, we should have done it. So I'm really glad to see this moving forward on that part. I think this is somewhat data-driven because there's a big concern about the density that's in that area. And it will be interesting to see, along with the vision of this, how we evaluate those recent projects that have gone in and their effect, because we haven't had an opportunity to see what's the effect of the new housing at Southdale and the new housing over by Byerly's. So it's it'll be interesting to see how that information starts dribbling in and can be absorbed by the group. And like any other, you read a good research or journal article, the big important section at the end is always recommendations for further research. So this is I'm glad to see this moving forward, and I wish you very well with it, because it's going to be very interesting to see. And I hope all of those who are involved will be brave.
So I have a question, I guess is maybe a little clear to me. So this, as it's sitting right now, the first, say, month would only be on the west side of France? Or is there elements of the rest? Because I don't think you can just as easily break out the west side. It's a whole area. So I'm just curious what, maybe I was unclear on that. Or
no, I think it's a fair question. And if you remember when we met, this all came together very quickly.
Yeah.
The initial stage, that the organizing guide, is really about establishing guiding principles. And there might be principles that are different for the west side of France Avenue than for the rest of the greater Southdale area. There might be guiding principles that are different for different portions of the west side of France Avenue, because, as we note, it's not homogeneous. So I think there's a part of this is really to make certain that a greater body of the Planning Commission is able to get in and work with the refining the work plan, so that some of those questions can be vetted a little further.
Yeah, I just want to, as we won't be solved tonight, but I just want to make it a clearer scope of work, if you will, what we're looking at, because it could very quickly go in many different directions. And if we have that scope, we can say, well, no, we're not, that's a parking lot or something else. So I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I want to make sure when we do this that it's very specific what it's looking at, and doesn't stray, otherwise we'll never get anywhere.
And I think one of the important things that we need to look at here is that we can't allow this process to be more in any particular stage than what the work group can handle. And that's why in this first set of interactions, it's only about setting guiding principles, not reviewing density, not talking about the details of infrastructure, but only setting principles and taking on manageable pieces of work that can allow the rest of the project to build upon the initial stages.
So I think what we're saying, we're going to have it's going to be steps and building blocks, right, to get to where we hope to get to, get derailed. So just from a timing standpoint then, so when's the next council meeting? Should this, I guess my question is, should this go, it's assuming we recommend this here, should this go to the next council meeting for public discussion at that point?
Yeah.
And then, there's going to be some appointing things going on too, and I'm not sure how the timing works on that either. And then it, could come back to us on the 11th to fill in some of the blanks too.
Yeah, the next council meeting is next Tuesday. The agenda has been set and everything is out already. Well, not out, but completed. And
right. I mean,
now the 7200 notice. The 7200 France project is on the agenda, based on their recommendation to prepare findings for denial. So that will be in front of them. Now, whether the applicant is going to request an extension, I haven't heard from them. But that said, the council did approve our change in the work plan, so they have given us the authorization to begin this. Maybe it's something that we can tighten up just this first stage with a 30-day or 60-day outline, and suggest to the council that we'd like them to populate some of that group, or at least give them the framework. The outline of that first stage. We could do that next Tuesday.
Yeah, does that make sense to everyone?
No, I see this as we just start running with it. I mean, right now, are we waiting we should appoint our 2 members tonight? Or I mean, I don't see it having to go back to the council all the time before we can move forward. I think we just got to.
Well, I don't disagree necessarily, but to get the people it needs to go back to the council.
Yeah, but that can be done concurrently.
What's that?
Not for the planning, as you're saying, not for the planning.
We could actually get that part cranked out. One thing I did want to talk about the work group
Well,
a
just
bit.
hang on a second. So back to the planning commission. I'm kind of on the fence if we appoint them tonight or not. It's people time to think about it or not. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. So. Well, that may be
Well, we could see if
that may
anybody
be a
will step
That may
forward.
be a fair point, but
Let's see if anybody wants to throw their name in the hat, and if
So-
not, then maybe we do need time to think about it. But.
Okay, so, all right, so we've got that. We'll come back to that, but if you want to talk about the,
Yeah, I think it is supposed. Here's one thought. I think that the number 6 plus 6, that's 12, versus what we talked about, 8 plus 8, 16. For this, just coming out of the Valley View, Wooddale small area plan, and of course that's a much smaller area. And I don't know what was your experience on Grandview, but it really came down to almost a core group of less than 10 that really could work well together. And I almost feel like maybe a dozen would sort of be the right number versus trying to go higher than that. And the reason that didn't add up, I think we had discussed something like that, like somewhere here, maybe. Perhaps, what do you envision as being the non-planning commission person, or, for example?
There's probably a need for a transportation commission member to be here because they have invested a lot of time and energy on France Avenue directly, and there is a transportation imperative. I mean, it was an issue for the 7200 project. There were probably other parcels that will have a transportation traffic impact as well. And it does bring in the notion of, as the city has pushed France Avenue along a path that I think aligns with the Living Street idea for a major arterial roadway, that somebody with experience from the Transportation Commission on the Living Streets policy framework that they've developed ought to be participating in this.
Okay, and then community organization, an example of?
The Edina Chamber was they were at every France Avenue meeting and extremely supportive of not only the pedestrian-oriented nature of the improvements that Mr. Rickards' firm has worked on, but when we looked at the streetscape improvements, they were very supportive of those improvements as well.
Looking at the numbers there, again, I would kind of concur with Commissioner Lee. Maybe if the council is appointing a neighborhood person, for example, then that comes out of the next page just from the sheer numbers of it. I'm just concerned because all of a sudden we're at 16 people. I'm assuming somebody from the city's there, at least 1 to 2 people. Boom, we're at 20 people. And
there's kind of a spectrum to consider here, and I think that one of the things that this was trying to do is to recognize that having the city council have its opportunity to appoint a neighborhood representative in an area that's potentially filled with some tension right now would be a good thing.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm talking about the total number here of people.
But there's also kind of a spectrum because as the Grandview process went from an initial group that might have been 14 or 16, the second Grandview was 52 people, I think, and I think we have a lot of latitude to stay somewhat below 52 if we look at a work group.
52. So that's my comment. Commissioner Carr.
Well, I think given the magnitude and the importance of this study, I don't think 16 is too many, because you have a lot of people that maybe you'll actually, at the end of the day, maybe some all can't participate to the same degree, but it's such a valuable resource for this community, the Southdale area, and what a great opportunity with the development activity that's going on for us to give the structure, give it vision, that I think that 16s and the type of representatives that you've identified here would be very valuable.
Well, let me say this. It's not like only 16 people have input here.
Right.
I mean, we'll have
That's right.
a lot of public forums, public input also. So it's not, don't take it as 16 people. What I guess I'm getting at 16 people is it nimble enough, is it small enough to actually get visioning statements out? And that's what I'm concerned about. There'll be public input, and especially if we go on to phase 2, who knows, that could expand a fair amount more. As the wheel rolls here, I think we're going to pick up people along the way, especially as the studies come and evolve in some things, and as people get more awareness of it also.
Well,
So I'm just,
yeah,
you know,
I
the
still
early
think
part is the numbers I'm concerned about.
I still think that, yeah, all these groups that you've identified, the stakeholders, I mean, I think how many, there's 4 commercial property owners, 1 appointed, 4 nominated by the smaller group. I mean, it's obviously a commercial area. You need adequate representation there. You need neighborhood representation. And I think that even though you're going to have larger public meetings with more public input, it's the smaller group that's really going to do the job of bringing all this information and feedback together and identifying these principles, the guiding principles. So I think you do need the representation from all these groups. I think this working group is going to be key, and working with probably a consultant, as you did with the some of the other areas as well, but to have this representation and feedback.
Let's see the next. How would we?
Well, I think, yeah, I think you'd still have the representation. It's, would you have 3 or 4 of each neighborhood? I mean, would you have 2 or 3 versus 3 or 4? That's my question. So, I mean, the numbers, you know, the individualist, I agree with.
We could look at it this way.
Numbers,
There's a principle, you know, based on what we're talking about in the first stage here. There's a principle about equal representation. There's a principle about equal numbers of appointments versus nomination. And if it's 6, or if it's 12 or 14 or 16, it's less important than the principle about how we get to that number. The city council may determine for us how many people they want to appoint, or a group that is assembled here from this body might make a stronger recommendation in the time between now and when it goes forward to the city council. I don't think it has to be decided tonight, but I think there are principles that underlie how we're getting to this kind of organization.
Commissioner Forst.
I agree with Commissioner Carr as far as I think the complexity of this area is key, and we need to, whatever the number is, to ensure that there are these points of view and this experience available to this group is going to be crucial. It's a lot. It might be more cumbersome. I think, again, that might be leadership is going to make a difference. But it's that experience and that ownership by the members. The more diverse it is as far as what they can bring to the table, as far as their breadth of knowledge, I think is going to be very useful in this area. So.
Commissioner Carr.
I just wanted to compliment you. You did a wonderful job putting this together in a short period of time. I think it's a great framework, and I do think Southdale is one of the best community assets and resources that we have. Again, we have a great opportunity here to make a difference. So again, I wanted to compliment you, Commissioner Platter, and Planner Teague as well for your assistance. It's a great product.
Commissioner Schroeder. Oh, did she? Oh, she added me. Okay. We'll make sure he gets all the kudos. So next steps, we could appoint 2 members of the Planning Commission tonight, if there's any volunteers for that.
Or do you want to just go ahead and appoint? Start there and have people to come.
Just go down the row. Well, I
2 people who aren't here tonight that might just... 3 actually, yeah.
I think that's a little much at that point, but
I'm not sure brand new member is really just like
yeah. So
experience.
But I mean, so Michael, you're going to stay involved, right? You won't be a planning commissioner, but would you be? I mean, I just can't imagine.
Right now, I think I will be presenting this to the city council if it goes forward to that, and after that, I'll leave it to what the city council wants to do.
Yeah. Okay.
we're sure hoping he stays involved.
So hoping he stays with it.
If we get a vote.
Yeah. Explain how that 10 meetings in 20 days worked.
Actually,
It doesn't happen.
Actually, it worked really well in
Yeah.
Grandview. I mean, it was a very committed group of people, and it took information from a first community gathering that I think actually happened in this room, and it basically distilled information that was gathered from the community, and worked very collaboratively to come up with 7 guiding principles. It wasn't originally intended that there would be 7, but it was originally intended that there would be a set of principles that would guide the process and eventually the evolution. It just turned out that when we took all the information that was posted on the walls around this room, there were 7 principles that came through where there was agreement. And it became the tool that guided the entire process, and they were eventually embodied in the framework plan.
But like specifically, did you meet evenings, weekends? How did you fit it all in? And
Yeah, both.
I think it's before I would say
You want to nominate somebody?
I would like to nominate Joanne Olson as one of the two.
You still haven't explained the 10 meetings in 20 days.
It'll be fine.
Well, just take 20 and divide it by 10.
Make sandwiches.
And actually,
Every other day.
and you probably won't make all 10, quite realistically. I mean, I don't think very few people did. A few people did. Kevin, yeah, look where that got him. So, Joanne, is it?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I would love to be involved with this. It's just that it's scary. That 30 days. That's a lot.
So nominate someone else. Who would you work with?
Well, I think, don't you, Michael? Shouldn't you be on it too, or Steve?
Steve.
I mean, how you could just go like this. Anyone would be good, unless you guys are burned out.
I'll just say, I mean, I would certainly love to help out. Before I make a commitment like that, though, I need to speak to my colleagues at work and make sure that it's okay with those guys. But I'm certainly interested.
Yeah. So, two potential. Well, well, that's what I was kind of. I mean, we can. Nobody has to commit tonight. I guess we have some interest, and I guess I would say. What's that? Yeah, interested planning commissioners. And having said that, I mean, you could submit something to Carrie in the next.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I think what might be useful if there were 2 or 3 people who get together in the next week and start refining some of the work plan elements, that would be a really good first step, because right now this whole thing has been just a couple of us in a very short time trying to put an idea forward. So the process of kind of elaborating, particularly on stage 1, and maybe even getting into a little more discussion about the composition of the work group might happen really in an effective way with a smaller group of the planning commission.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to. Partially, I was going to get to next is that somewhere in between now and then, this needs to get, or sooner than later, it starts to get fleshed out, right? With dates and times and potential meetings, and I would volunteer at least to help on that part. If there's any other takers.
Yeah, I would volunteer to help with that.
Yeah, involved in that. So, Joanne and Steve, I guess, unless there's.
I'd help with that, for sure.
Somebody else. We don't want to get a quorum, of course, so maybe that's. And he's off,
right.
So I guess.
Yeah.
That's the 3. He's consulting volunteer. He gets paid even more than we do at that point. So, okay. Any others? So it sounds like we have that, and we can talk afterwards, just how we want to meet and when. So, do we need? What else do we need? Do anything to do formal here? I guess it goes to the city council as what you said before, right?
Yeah, maybe we can talk offline if you want to come to the council meeting next Tuesday.
Because we'll need appointments by not this meeting, but the next meeting, right? So it's not that far away either. Okay, next up, correspondence and petitions, council update and attendance. I don't know, was there a council update in here?
Yes.
Okay. And then the attendance records also. Just so everyone's clear, I think everyone is, but next time we'll have 3 new members, and Carrie, you've notified them, right? And then
I have. I meet with each of them tomorrow to give them their zoning ordinances, comp plans, all that good stuff.
Okay, and then we. They're on the list. Yeah, sorry. They're on the list, and they were part of the council minutes or council appointments at their last meeting. And then the other thing is, still, it's coming up quick, but on the 25th, we had a orientation meeting scheduled for that at 5:30. So Carrie, I guess whatever we need to do for public noticing on that should probably occur then. And I need to get agenda together, and I'll pass to Carrie. You can pass to folks to get some input on that. And at this point, we were not inviting Roger, were we? Or were we? We were not, right? It was more, heck, what do you do, right? I mean, kind of the basics. And of course, our alumni commissioners are certainly welcome to come back also, to give us any pointers.
I'll be on vacation.
Oh, shoot.
Otherwise, I would love.
Maybe we get Councilmember Staunton to come in as a guest appearance or something, too.
There you go.
Any other chair and commission comments? Any chair and commission comments? Commissioner Forrest?
Wooddale Valley View, small area plan draft is posted now, and we've already made some tweaks based on comments that have come in. So if people are interested and they're following that and they have comments, we still would like to receive them. And also, if you are following it, you may want to check back every once in a while and see if it's a more recent draft than what you've looked at before. And the pieces are starting to fall into place. So there is a bit of a delay, but it's kind of like we need to get this right. So, Susan, do you have anything more?
No, I think that we've received. I think we've received comments from the commission. So right now we're just incorporating our feedback and getting it organized, and hopefully make it a more useful document for.
And Speak Up is one of the avenues they can use for comments, or they can send an email to Karen Kurt or to Carrie, and then it would be distributed to all of us as well. So, and it'll be
Great.
going to the council next.
At least have one under our belt at that point, right?
Yeah.
Any staff comments, Carrie?
As you asked the last time, I can show you some examples of how we interpret our city code. Unless you'd like to do that next time, or?
Sure.
We're ready tonight.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a follow-up to Mr. Gross' comments, right?
Well, oh, just one, is this something you think that the new members would be interested in or not? That's.
Well, it's a response to last meeting where the community comment with Mr. Groats
as
came
far as
in.
the
2 sets of questions.
specific comments, okay.
Specific on the house next door.
All right.
Yeah, I wasn't going to get into specifics of that project. That was a building permit that was approved last summer and does meet our codes. And so the question came up: how do you interpret the code? Some of these examples are almost exactly
I think
the same.
part of it was also the height requirements, right, where that's interpreted from.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so this will focus mainly on that side yard setback and how we calculate height and the actual setback. The issue that we're running into is mainly on lots over 75 feet in width. You recall about a year ago, we've amended the code to increase the setback on lots less than 75 feet, generally like a foot on each side. You know, there's that sliding scale. Builders have the option to use our old standard where you have to increase the setback 6 inches for every foot above 15 feet in height on the second story. So you get that step-in effect. Or you can just choose the standard setback, the new setback, where it was increased. What we're finding is most builders are doing just that. They're not doing that step-in on the second level. So lots under 75 feet in general, they're using that 6 feet on one side, 6 feet on another. But for the lots over 75 feet, that step-in still applies. So this first example, this is a 80-foot wide lot. We have a new home that's being built here. And it's a little difficult. I should have made that a little bigger. But you can see a 14-foot setback here and about 18 on this side. So with this property, 10-foot setbacks are required on each side for any lot that's over 75 feet in width. Previous to our code change, you may recall that we allowed a garage to be 5 feet from a side yard. So that's quite an increase already. So no structures can be within 5 feet now on these lots over 75 feet. So they're needing to start with 10 on each side. So this elevation that we're looking at is this side right here. So for determining the side yard setback, it's based on the height. And we measure on a gable roof like this, we take the average, or the midpoint of the gable. So you can see, here's an example of a gable that the roof bends. I think we saw some elements from those pictures the last time, kind of to break up the sidewall, the articulation. They're doing some things here to break up the mass. But we measure the gable from the eave. So the eave in this case is located right here. Not up in this area here where the bend is. It's taken from the eave as defined in the code. And we measure from the average proposed grade on a side. So you can see we've got a 10-foot drop. Up here it's at 952. Here 942. So a 10-foot drop. So we're measuring halfway between the two. So from the 952, you see it's a 17-foot tall side yard. We would add the 5 feet to that. So the height here on this side wall is 22 feet. So we've got 7 feet above the 15 feet. So we need to add 6 inches for every foot above 15 feet. So that adds an additional 3.5 feet, half of the 7. So the required side yard for the second level here is 13.5 feet. You can see they've chosen to set the whole structure back 14 feet. But they could have, this element could be set back 10 feet, and this would have to be stepped in, the additional 3.5 feet. So that's how it's done. It's very confusing to our residents, to builders, to staff.
Well, I mean, to that point, is that something that should be looked at changing on lots above 75 feet in width?
Yes.
To be similar for the other ones. I'm asking the question. I don't know, what have you guys seen on the lower size lots? Has that been working to do that?
It's working on the lower size, on the lots smaller than 75 feet in width. So this seems like it's penalizing a property that's wider than 75 feet. You now have to increase your setback from 10 feet to, like in this case, 13. So they've got a little more room to work with, but it is an added penalty, so to speak, for them. And just the confusion of the way that ordinance reads. And
just an observation, one part of the confusion seems to me that our formula is measuring, if you go back to the picture of the structure you're using as an example, Carrie, if I understand this correctly, our formula is measuring to the midpoint of the gable that is closest to the side yard.
Right.
The house itself is actually quite a bit taller in this example, and I think that's confusing to residents. I understand that's how you apply the formula, but I think there are a number of things here that, as people look at it, they get a vision, and this seems contrary to what they are expecting will happen.
Yep, I would agree.
So having said that, I don't know about anyone else, but if there's a code revision that if you want to bring something forth, to address that, I think we'd be open to at least looking at that. To try and simplify it, if nothing else. If that's the case, and we're running into these things of these discrepancies, and he said, she said kind of thing. And this isn't to say that we're not sensitive to these issues, but we're trying to make it a case where it's an agreed upon standard that hopefully is simple enough for people to use also.
If it's just a standard number and no formula applied to it, it's much easier for
I guess
everybody.
if it's, I'd like to see some examples under 75 feet how that's being applied.
Sure.
And maybe the setbacks are also modified for lots over 75 if that's the case, to try and like we did for under 75. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I find the gable, introduction of the gable a little confusing, because I think that has become so much of an architectural element now, surface treatment wise. So it will be hard to define where is that gable.
Yeah, and that's
and the average. I hate working with averages. So if there is any way to simplify it so that we can go right to an actual dimension and not have to calculate or do something to manipulate that number, that would be much more clear and more simpler, more direct.
That's a tough one just because those grades can vary so much along that side of the building. So. But I'm not disagreeing it should be simpler.
Yeah, we'd be glad to come back with some ideas. To run to another example, when there's a window well involved on that side yard. So this is could be egress, could possibly even be a lookout, but we see them in all shapes and sizes, varying depths. So again, this is a 80-foot wide lot where we're looking at the side yard here. This is an example of a home that's pretty flat on the side. So we've got the bottom of the eave here. So the midpoint is up here. So the height here is 20 feet. So they need to increase the setback 2.5 feet, half of the 5 above 15. The question that came up is, should we include the bottom of the window well when determining factoring this in the average grade along the foundation wall? We have not. We've just taken the grade adjacent to the house. So as an example, here's one that's built. You can see, so we're measuring the height from the grade that's visible. We're not taking the bottom of that window well. So that's how we calculate that. We haven't had any issues with that.
Does that need a clarification in the code?
Yeah, I suppose that could be.
Maybe that's...
The wording just talks about the grade adjacent to the building.
Yeah. Commissioner Forrest.
A couple of things. One, we've had the discussion before, too, about average grade, and we do it at the front of the house, and then there's still feedback from the community about their concern about these 3.5-story walkouts that they're looking at under new construction. So it might be something we will want to revisit in the future. But I've noticed when I've been looking in the code, as far as maximum ridge heights, it says 30 feet, 35 feet, but then only no greater than 45 feet or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's confusing as to which one applies here, because they're worded very similarly. And you look at one section, but it can be only 30 feet. And then later on, it says, but a maximum of only 45 feet. So we might want to look at that, the language in the code regarding the maximum ridge heights, just so there isn't that ambiguity.
Yeah, if we address this issue about measuring the side yard height, if we eliminate that increase 6 inches for every foot above 15, I think that confusion between the two goes away, and we're just focusing on the height of the front. So as an example, this house, we would measure from just the front to the ridge line. Have one, so you had asked us to talk about some of our observations, which I think we've already covered here in regard to the above 75 feet. But I do have one other scenario that we've run into. It's kind of the unintended consequences of actually an ordinance that we amended about 6-7 years ago in regard to that 1 foot rule, and especially when it applies to split levels where we're measuring from the entry. So we're running into homes that are, when there's a previous split entry, to meet our 1 foot rule, they're digging down in order to meet the 1 foot rule so as not to apply for a variance. And the consequence is we're seeing retaining walls alongside lot lines where there could be as much as a 4 or 5 foot drop right at the lot line because they've dug the home out in order to meet that 1 foot rule. And you remember how we measure the height of the home from the previously existing grade. So you're actually seeing more home in some instances. If they're digging down 4 feet, their house could be 4 feet taller. Not sure how we solve that one, but that's one that we're starting to see.
If you have any suggestions.
Yeah. So those were our 3 issues.
Something specifically to homes that are split levels. That rule was really intended for first floor levels.
Right. So. Yeah, and that's one we've tweaked over and over here through the years. And
have we cleared up identifying which is the front door, if there's a front door?
Yeah, I think we're clear now with that.
How does that read now that it's, or how are we interpreting it?
Seems to be working so far. It's just been a few months, but so far so good.
How is it that we determine if you have 2 front entries and one's at the lower level of the split and one's higher, that was a...
Well, we excluded the garage door, so we're not including that anymore. But otherwise, it was the lower of the 2, I believe. Is that?
Yeah, I know it excluded the garage.
Yeah.
So, would it say into the house and living quarters?
Yeah.
I think it said. Okay.
So with that, we'll be glad to take a look at some potential changes.
Thank you. So with that, we're almost at the end. And again, I'd like to thank our departing commissioners so much for all your help over the years, and going to miss your knowledge. And Commissioner Scheer, I think you could tell us any residential house we've looked at over the last 9 years, right? Down to the address, I believe. If it had a 2-car garage or not, and all those issues. So
I just want to, if I might for a minute, say it's just been a real honor and a privilege to serve on the Planning Commission. Current commissioners, past commissioners, I've learned so much and have enjoyed being able to make a contribution to the community. I encourage, I know we've just selected 3 new ones, so it might be a little while, but I encourage people in the community to really consider serving on boards and commissions. You will be astonished at the energy level, the knowledge level, the time commitment that your fellow citizens make, and you'll be proud that you live in a city where that is going on. I was thinking of past chairmen, too, as you and I have been here for, I actually made a list while I was sitting here, Lonsberry, Fisher, Graybill, Staunton, and Flatteter. So we've been...
David Byron.
And, well, I
that's right.
arrived just after David departed, but yeah. So you have even another with whom you served. So it's an incredible tribute to our community that we have people that are willing to do this, give so freely of their time and their talent. And it's just been a real pleasure to serve with everybody.
Well, the city is certainly in your debt for your years of service. We appreciate it. Commissioner Schroeder, any?
That's enough.
Okay, fair point. Again,
10 o'clock and cookies.
Thank you. And whichever, I want to eat cookies. We got to get to that. So whoever wants to do the honor of.
I move that we adjourn.
I can second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. And I know there's no nays, but I'll ask anyway. Perfect. Well, thanks again. On to cookies.